Ladies and gentlemen, recorded in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, it's time for Fight Night Picks with your hosts, Trey and Allen.
And a big time card coming up this weekend from the UFC's Apex facility. It's a $100 million facility, and they're paying for it with fights like this. Coming up this weekend, headlining is a rematch between Vicente Luque and Belal Muhammad. Going way back to 2016, UFC 205, the original meeting with Vicente Luque earning a big-time statement performance win in that first stanza. Can't wait for it. As always, one half of your hosting duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. With me to my left, to your right, as always, the man himself, Matt Allen, on the respective socials. We make it very easy for you at Matt Allen FNP. Matt Allen, couple of big-time title fights this past weekend at 273. Petr Yan's crazy yell. The official way for Petr to get him the win, but it was a very controversial decision nonetheless. And in the main event, you had Volkanovski really pulling away, putting on an incredible statement performance. But when we parlay that into the weekend coming up, we've got 4 different UFC debuts, debuting fighters coming off a Contender Series in the co-main event, a little bit of a head-scratcher. And for me, I look at this card overall, and this is kind of a classic Zellers card, or for you folks down in the States, it's a Circuit City card, because you get the opportunity for a lot of fighters that are on the downturn, they're on the down spell, and you get the opportunity to buy low. So let us know what you're thinking about it, but a lot of people need to have some big performances, and usually these are the cards that deliver in terms of entertainment value.
I'm insanely excited for this weekend's main event. It's not very often that you see 2 fighters fight on the prelims when they're relatively unknown, if we're being completely honest, and then they build themselves up to them becoming headline quality fighters. It never happens. Like, maybe one of the 2 will then go on to have a really successful career, but when you have somebody who loses by first round knockout on the prelims of a pay-per-view, you don't really expect them to then go on this really long run like the one Belal Muhammad's been able to go on. So it's been really nice to see his just overall career trajectory, because he has had some bigger losses. He lost to Jeff Neal, lost to Vicente Luque, but he always comes back stronger and looks like a much better version of himself. And with Vicente Luque, in pitching, in like baseball, people like to judge a pitcher on their nastiness, you know, like how nasty is their stuff. Vicente Luque throws like knuckle curveballs and a fastball that's 103 miles an hour. His strikes are just filthy. They come from weird angles. He's extremely aggressive. I really do think that this main event, okay, it might not overshadow Gilbert Burns versus Khamzat Chimaev, because that's going to be a tough act to follow. But I really do think that this is going to be a super fun main event at 170.
Should be a great card. We also have to mention there is another rematch on this card, and it's almost like a rematch between Lina Lansberg taking on Pannie Kianzad. Very familiar with each other from that Swedish, not only striking scene, but MMA scene as well. Faced off very early on in their respective careers. As I mentioned, 4 debuts, a lot of great fights. We'll throw it on over to the Fight Night Picks Fight of the Night screen, and you let us know who your picks are, because there's some clear-cut winners in this one. You would be led to believe.
Let us know down below in the comments section who you've got. It's time for the Fight of the Night with Fight Night Picks.
And so it is Elizeu Zaleski de Santos taking on Mounir Lazzez. And if we know anything about the sniper and a guy who got the nickname off of the dancey, strikey type of background for Zaleski de Santos, this guy had his Matt Brown run at one point. He went on a 7-fight win streak. It was magical. It was amazing. But it wasn't against anybody that was really that big a name, and it wasn't really against some giant ranked opponents. Now, Sean Strickland has aged well as a win, but if you cap it off with Curtis Millender, it really does kind of change things. And for Zaleski de Santos, his last 4 or 5 fights, you win one, you lose one. They've been fun, except for the Muslim Salikov fight. But when it comes down to this one, take on Mounir Lazzez, you meet fire with fire, you get hotter fire.
I don't know how this fight doesn't exceed expectations, and you're right. Everybody was really down on Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos after that fight he had against everybody's favorite Sanda Wushu old man Muslim Salikov, but that did not live up to our expectations whatsoever, and it was really unfortunate because that felt like it was finally a big spotlight fight for both of those guys, and like I said, it didn't really lead up to expectations, but Elizeu looked phenomenal his last time out, and with him, you always kind of wonder when is Father Time going to catch up to him. He is a little bit older, but so far, he has been that exciting fighter no matter what. You bring up his record as of late, you're right. Are they all wins? Not at all, but are they all exciting? For the most part, they are, and I think this fight against Mounir Lazzez is really going to bring out the best in both guys.
Mounir Lazzez coming off a 1-2-3 body shot kicks. by Warlley Alves. He showed up to fight in that one, and Mounir Lazzez crumpled to the pressure, but we know exactly what we can get out of Lazzez. This should be an amazing fight. And when it comes to the second pick, we keep it in the welterweight division. You look at it, Miguel Baeza. He's on a losing streak. He's only ever lost 2 fights in his overall career. These are the 2, so you know he's got to come out and pick up a big-time win. Both guys training in South Florida. You've got Andre Fialho coming out of Sanford MMA, that Jason Jackson camp. I'll reference him forever, but especially a great training partner at 170. And for Fialho, had a very, very competitive fight on a super short-notice UFC debut against Michel Pereira his last time out. So couple of guys, they can really get it done with the striking. This is one that if your weird Uncle Jim's into MMA, maybe show him this fight.
This is one of those fights where, sort of on the flip side to what I said about the main event, how sometimes you have guys in the prelims who, it doesn't really matter what the result is, they'll work their way back up and then be future main eventers. I don't know if Baeza or Fialho will ever really get to that main event stratosphere, but I do think this fight's going to be extremely fun. You have 2 natural strikers who are not afraid to eat a strike to give a strike. These are the fights that everybody gets excited for, and in the welterweight division, it doesn't really matter how the top 15 is right now. Like, just exciting performances get you noticed. Matt Brown was the co-main event a couple weeks ago, so I really do think that if either guy just looks really impressive, they can probably have another big fight.
Max Griffin won a few fights in a row, fought himself in near the top 10 in a matchup against Neil Magny not that long ago, so great opportunity for both guys. And for Andrea Fialho, already a guy who's akin to a big fight early on in his career over with Bellator. So great opportunity for both of these guys. Some great fights coming up this weekend. Let us know who you have in a possible fight of the night down below in that comment section. So debuting fighters abound. We've got Trey Ogden. We've got Martin Buday making that debut representing Slovakia. And in the co-main event, of course, it is Gachi Omargadzhiev taking on Caio Borralho. Should be an amazing fight in that one. Middleweight stand up. One of those divisions that's a little bit stagnant right now, and you know that they need some big time middleweights. And for Martin Buday taking on Chris Barnett, Dana White more or less said, yeah, you know we need heavyweights, so yeah, get on over here. So for Martin Buday, a big time opportunity. I know there's a lot of fights that we're really looking forward to, and for us Canadians out there, couple of our guys are in some tricky spots. We get Jesse Ronson coming back after the 2-year USADA layoff, and then you also have TJ Laramie getting a short notice call to take on Pat Sabatini. But Matt, overall, this is one of those cards, again, some fighters on some tricky little losing streaks. Sam Hughes, 0-3 to start her UFC career. She needs a win or she ends up at 500, and she has switched gyms. What's a fight that might fly under the radar that I know you're looking forward to?
You had kind of mentioned it. I really do think that Pat Sabatini, TJ Laramie fight is going to be a fun one. Because for Sabatini, I think he's a very, very good prospect. I'm not really sure if he's crossed over to the elite just yet, because he has had some close fights in the past, although you know just how good some of his strengths are. And I do think that Laramie's the type of opponent who, he's pretty good everywhere. So he's going to make you work pretty hard no matter what area of the fight it's in. I think that's going to be a good one. And I know we were both pretty excited for the original Pat Sabatini versus Gavin Tucker. They throw another Canadian in there against Sabatini, but I really do think that fight's flying under the radar.
Melzik Baghdasaryan, TJ Laramie? No. And then you go, yeah, Gavin Tucker, Pat Sabatini? No, just throw those 2 guys together. So it should be a great card, and I know you folks out there are going to have a good time. Toss a like at the start of the video. Let your friends know about this stuff that's going on with Fight Night Picks. It's the 4th anniversary of the channel, so get up for that. We got some great fights coming up. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. Yeah, I had a little bit of fun with the graphic. Coming up this week, we have Alatengheili looking to get a win. He's in dire straits, really, at this point of his career. And he's taking on Kevin Croom, who one could consider to be in the same spot in his overall career. Now, for Kevin Croom, tons of experience away from the UFC. Before he made his debut, a lot of wins next to a lot of losses, and we've talked about this time and again. For the experience for Croom outside of the big promotion, you look at some of those fights. He got slammed by Justin Gaethje in Gaethje's pro debut. Well, Gaethje's going to take on Charles Oliveira in the not-so-far-away future for titles, so that one's all right, okay. Nate Jennerman, he got guillotined in less than 50 seconds, all right. Kamwell Kirk, he got triangle chirked. Well, he's in the UFC. John Macapa in Bellator. Well, John Macapa, he's a pretty good fighter. Adil Benjelani, a win over with Bellator. And then somehow, Kevin Croom's able to get a win over Anderson Hutchison at FAC 3. FAC, they fight a little close to glory MMA and fitness. And then he ends up into the UFC. Takes on Roosevelt Roberts. He beats him. He earns the performance of the night. It was a crazy standing guillotine in 31 seconds. And all of that is taken away by the commission because Kevin Croom tested positive for, and I want to make sure I get this one right, the righteous bush. So, for Kevin Croom, comes back, takes on Alex Caceres, tries to take him down again and again and again, and he goes 1 for 12 on takedown attempts, and he didn't look all that great in that fight. So then he's supposed to take on Marcelo Rojo. The fight falls out. He waits a little bit longer, and it's almost a full year before he comes back out and takes on Brian Kelleher on short notice. And when he takes on Kelleher at 145 pounds, what happens? Brian Kelleher dusts him in a decision.
And Brian Kelleher was this much smaller guy in that fight, and I thought the physicality and the size of Croom would be able to give him a little bit of success going against Kelleher, and no disrespect to Brian Kelleher at all. I think this channel is one of the more pro boom boom Kelleher channels out there, but I really did think that the immense size of Kevin Croom was going to help him a lot in that fight, help him stay away from Kelleher. It didn't at all. Like, he was really stationary in that fight, and Kelleher was able to just get on the inside repeatedly, be it with his strikes or with his own takedown attempts. And that's what I find interesting trying to look at that fight comparing it to this one, because Alatengheili is also going to be the much smaller guy in this fight, but Kevin Croom hasn't really shown the ability to take total advantage of those physical benefits.
So that's it. I mean, with the graphic, you guys can see it there. 5'11" for Kevin Croom, 73 odd inches in reach. He's going to have roughly a 7-inch reach advantage and 6 inches of height. But sometimes he doesn't use those tools that have been given to him all that well. And I want to make sure I issue a correction, because against Alex Caceres, Kevin Croom didn't go 1 of 12. He went 1 of 16 in his overall takedown attempts. It was really bad. And when you look at the scores in just the Caceres fight and the Brian Kelleher fight, one judge has given Kevin Croom a round out of those two fights. Like, they haven't been all that competitive. Caceres, there's some 30-26s even bounced in there. So it just hasn't been a good showing since he comes in on really short notice, takes on Roosevelt Roberts, and has like a marquee statement submission win that, just due to unfortunate circumstances, I guess we'll say, is considered a no contest blemish on his record.
If we're all looking at ourselves in the mirror, though, and being very honest with ourselves, the win over Roosevelt Roberts hasn't aged all that well. And at the time, it was a big win, don't worry. Like, I'm not just trying to play it off the results, because at the time, that was a great win. It was a nice submission.
Croom was over a plus 400 underdog in that spot.
But just since then, if you win in 30 seconds, we learn a lot less about you than if you win in 15 minutes. Look at Khamzat Chimaev last night. He was great. He was untouchable before he fought Gilbert Burns. Now he's still really good. It's just, we know a lot more about him. There's a lot more information available. With Croom, yes, he looked really good against Roberts, but again, we know where Roberts is now, I should say. And for Croom, it just has been unfortunate, because with Croom, he never really has that one X factor that you think he can always go to. And in an MMA fight, you never want to be watching a fighter and almost wishing he was doing something he wasn't always doing. Because I always go back to the Caceres fight. He was having a little bit of success at distance with Caceres. I know that's a weird thing to say, but he kept on trying to go for those takedowns. And the gameplay when you're fighting Alex Caceres probably shouldn't just to be dart for takedowns all the time. He's got really good takedown defense. That's sort of how he's built his whole entire game. So it just kind of showed a lack of kind of high-level fight IQ out of Kevin Croom. And then when you look at just his inability to use his distance well in the Brian Kelleher fight, I do worry about how is he going to keep Alatengheili off of him in this matchup, because I do think Kevin Croom, he's the much more powerful guy just because he is the naturally bigger guy. I do think if these guys do start landing some, one strike for one strike combinations, Croom might end out on the better end of them. Not because he's the better striker. Again, I do just think the size of him is going to help his power a little bit, but I do think that if Haley can get on the inside, he could start to put together some volume to the body and to the head, which might help him win rounds.
That's it. I mean, for Alatengheili, makes his UFC debut way back against Dana Bakary, and that fight was, and I want to make sure that I get this one right, it was 2 years and 7 months ago. Wins that one, Bakary rallies at the end, it's a fight of the night, it's a great one, it leaves really a good taste in your mouth. Then he gets a win over Ryan Benoit. That fight was back 2 years and 3 months ago. You look at that one, split decision win goes the way of Alatengheili, but it was one of those ones that it could have gone either way. A lot of people thought Ryan Benoit won, and that was that Busan card that was early in the day. So maybe some people forget about it in terms of where it just logs in your overall brain. He goes out there and takes on Casey Kenny. There was a judge that had it 30-25 rounds 1 and round 2 as a 10-8. MMA decisions, there were 4 people that had it 30-24. Alatengheili was beaten heavily in the first and in the second round. Rallied a little bit in the third. And then his last time out there against Gustavo Lopez, it's a draw on the record. Alatengheili more than likely would have won that fight, but there was a point deducted for a fence grab in the third round of that fight. And when you look at Alatengheili and you look at Gustavo Lopez, A lot of similarities to their games. A lot of pressure on the inside, a lot of wrestling, and you'll see it out of Alatengheili. Maybe he'll pump a jab out there, but he's really relying on an overhand, a hook. He's very power heavy, and when it comes to a fight like this against Kevin Croom, it is kind of tough in most circumstances to ask a smaller guy to close the distance behind a guy who's this big, but if only Kevin Croom fought behind a jab.
Exactly. If only Stefan Struve knew how tall he was. That's the thing with Croom, and that's why I don't have much confidence in trying to make a pick for Kevin Croom in this fight, because he doesn't have tremendous finishing ability, especially on the feet. If he does get this on the mat, it might be a little bit different, and this is where both these guys kind of fall into. Kevin Croom is a good offensive wrestler, for the most part. He does struggle a little bit defensively, and so does Alatengheili. Like, Alateng can get offensive takedowns. He does struggle defensively with takedowns, though, so I am curious to see, does Haley go in there with an offensive mind with his grappling? Because I could see a world where he could get a takedown and look really good on top for a round, but I could also see a world where Kevin Croom takes him down in the first 30 seconds, and he's really able to work his submission game from that point on.
The odds for this one, Alatengheili open to favorite, minus 140, now at a minus 187 for Kevin Croom, open to plus 120. He's a plus 153. Have a look at the Topology votes. Surprise to us as they are to you, Matt. I'm going to say over under 65%. Alatengheili.
I'll say under.
You're going to say under. It's over 469 total votes. 74% going with Alateng. 89% by decision for the 26% that have Croom. 67% by decision. For Alatengheili, decent takedown defense in the UFC. On the regional scene, might not have been the greatest. 33% takedown offense in the UFC. He has gone for quite a bit. 1.75 per 15 minutes. And he has made the big ol' switch over in the last couple of camps, working out of Fight Ready. Obviously, you heard that Korean Zombies corner. There were a few different Fight Ready fighters last weekend. Henry Cejudo. But if you go over to Alatengheili's Instagram, Hunter Azure over there, Archie Long, you've got Kevin Natividad and Jordan Espinoza. All wrestlers. So we'll see how that plays out for Alatengheili. Poor striking accuracy in the UFC as well at a 32% clip. For Kevin Croom, bigger guy, Glory MMA and Fitness, the Grant Dawsons of the world, James Krause, so on and so forth. It seems like every weekend we kind of prop that gym up a little bit. But when it comes to this fight, Matt, I know we kind of set it up maybe a little bit more one way than the other, and we like to kind of try and split it down the middle. But what's the pick here?
If I didn't see Kevin Croom's last fight, I would pick him to win this, a large part based on his size. I really do think that has a huge part to play, especially in MMA. I know size is something we often think about because everybody has to make a weight class, so it really comes down to how much weight someone's willing to cut. But with Kevin Croom, he has all the physical advantages, especially for this weight class. I just don't think he can really use a lot of those advantages effectively, especially in this matchup. Now, I'm going to say this. I might be picking Alatengheili in this fight. I don't think he's going to go on to win 5-6 fights in a row by any stretch. I do think his activity is going to be just enough to edge some rounds away from Kevin Croom. Ali does have a good chin, and that's the thing. I will be curious to see who does start to wrestle earlier. If Croom is able to get this down to the mat early, I do think he can have success, but my official pick will be for Alatengheili.
I think you're going to see Croom wrestle earlier. Alatengheili's been more of a late wrestler in the late second to early third and throughout the third, and he normally loses those rounds too, so watch out for that one. But for me, I do have Alatengheili closing distance with the bigger shots. Kevin Croom, definitely a live dog out there, especially if you like him by submission in a matchup like this one. So let us know down below in the comments section who you have. Both of us going with the Mongolian Knight. It is Alatengheili, big time card headlined by the rematch between Vicente, Luque, and Belal Muhammad. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. If someone comes up to you like Francis the Hustler Kid from Recess and tells you, hey, I know exactly what's going to happen in this fight, they're a damn liar. That's what they are, because we have Istela Nunes taking on Sam Hughes. Ooh. And for Sam Hughes, she is on a 3-fight losing streak to begin her UFC career. Now, I've sung her praises. I was really excited about her making her debut. Now, if we look at the 5 on in, she loses to Vanessa Demopoulos back with LFA only a year and 8 months ago. And in that fight, Sam Hughes was having a ton of success with her pressure, and then all of a sudden she gets caught in one of those tricky inverted triangle chokes that Demopoulos likes to use, and she loses that fight. But it was a great performance by Hughes. She gets a win over Danielle Hindley over with LFA a year and 5 months ago, and then on short notice she gets called in, and they say, Red Rover, take on Tecia Torres, and it didn't go well for Sam Hughes. And her coach between round 1 and round 2 said, no dice, we can't take you out there for the second round. She had a little bit of an eye injury there. So Hughes able to work through that. She takes her next fight against Loma Lookboonmee. It did not go well for her in the Loma fight. Loma put on an incredibly complete performance, worked in the takedowns of her own. And then Sam's last fight, she takes on Luana Pinheiro, who is one heck of an uber prospect in this division, and once again on the losing end. So for Sam Hughes, there are some positives. She did rally back in that fight against Loma, made a good account of herself in the third round. Against Luana, it wasn't all that great. Against Tecia Torres, it wasn't good. But it was on really short notice, but it wasn't very good. So she's taking on Istela Nunes, who's one of those prospects, like she's 6-2 with a no contest, but prospects, or 7-2 rather, with a no contest, where I just kind of scratched my head because you're 29, she had a 2-year layoff due to USADA suspension, stenozolol metabolites there, and if you do look at it, the 5-on-in, it dates back a long time. Her win over Caroline Martins was almost 6 years ago. She beats Mei Yamaguchi, pioneer women's MMA, over with one championship 5 years, 7 months ago. Gets a title shot off of that almost 5 years ago against Angela Lee. Gets submitted in that, but listen, there's no shame. Angela Lee, hell of a fighter. Then she gets a win over Gina Inyong, which is good. I mean, 3 years, 8 months ago. Then the USADA suspension. Then she takes on Ariane Carnelossi. When it was on the feet, Istela Nunes didn't look that bad. Muay Thai's the background. She trains out of, Club de Luta over in Brazil. Last couple training camps, finishing them off, rounding things out at American Top Team, and I'll highlight that a little bit later. But Istela Nunes, it was like a hot knife through butter when it came to some of that takedown defense there for Carnelossi, who's one of the most physically gifted athletes in this division. We should say that. She can power through her takedowns, but Istela Nunes, it was a pretty disappointing UFC debut.
I don't mean this to be disrespectful, but we're talking about people like Carnelossi and Loma Lookboonmee giving both these fighters really big problems. It just kind of tells you where both of these fighters are in their MMA careers. Like, a win this weekend is very, very important for both Nunes and Sam Hughes, because like you said, Sam Hughes, not that there was a lot of hype behind her coming into the UFC, but there were some promising signs for sure. She has a well-rounded game. She showed off some really nice grappling up until that point, and she has sort of that toughness and cardio that don't just come along. Like, not that she's an uber athlete by any means, but she can keep a really solid pace as the fight continues. And you really thought that those skills were going to translate better into the UFC?
Collegiate athlete, track and field at Wofford. You love to see it.
Exactly, and those things do help her. It's not really often we say, hey, track and field's a good background for MMA, but she does have very, very good cardio, and that, of course, has helped her. But my issue with Sam Hughes is, again, when you're a fighter and you don't really have a natural skill that you can always go back to win you rounds, win you moments in a fight, it's going to be really hard for you to go out there and fight UFC caliber fighters. And the real question here is that what Istela Nunes is? Because you're right, she is a really good striker. She has flashy strikes, especially on the feet. She has a good combination of being light on her feet, but she can also sit down on some power shots. But she is a zero with her defensive grappling, or at least up until this point. She has not shown much really throughout her career up until this point to where she can get back up to her feet, really recompose guard like she's, Michael Bisping on the ground against GSP. She is a great striker, but this fight is one of those like water and oil fights. It's either going to be all Istela Nunes on the feet, or it's going to be all Sam Hughes on the mat.
That really is it for Nunes. I mean, it all depends on what you think of one championship, what you think of Angela Lee in terms of her grappling. I think Angela Lee's right here. And Ariane Carnelossi somewhere here. Where the hell does Sam Hughes fit into all this? Because Sam Hughes will always fight with pressure. She'll eat shots. She'll give one to take one. She's always going to be right there in your face. And that's what makes this one interesting. So if you do look at it for Istela Nunes, she has this in her Instagram bio. 54 Muay Thai fights, 50 wins. The ATT kind of rounding off the edges there, sanding things down over at American Top Team. She's got Valerie Lareda, Karina Dam. I know that's a name that, Matt, you get excited about. And Jacqueline, the new LFA strawweight champion over there. Now, we're going to talk about the LFA strawweight champs. There's been a lot of them recently, but we have another one there rounding out the grappling aspect of Nunes' overall game. And if you look at it for Hughes, kind of switching things up. She's gone to Fortis MMA for this training camp. But again, when we're talking about the fights that we've seen so far, not really the promising prospect that we saw outside of the UFC. And it's almost one of those runs like poor Hannah Cyphers had, where it was just buzzsaw, and she didn't really get a great opportunity.
I like what you brought up about her switching gyms, and I do agree with you. Maybe a change was nice, but this is what I go back to. Like, what was the big thing in her game that she could change with a gym switch, you know? Like, I don't think...
Maybe Jinyu Fry, somebody you can work your grappling with to get ready for Nunes.
I just think with Hughes, her grappling was going to be the X factor no matter what gym she was with. Either she was going to be better than Nunes, or she wasn't going to be able to complete the takedown, and she isn't going to be able to get it done on the feet. I just don't really know what a change in gym for this matchup is really going to help her with. I think maybe in the future it will help her out. I'm just not really sure in this matchup how much it will help her. But again, this fight for me completely comes down to, can Sam Hughes get the offensive takedown? But this is the issue. I've seen her get out grappled by Loma Lookboonmee at this point, and nothing against Loma. Her grappling definitely has improved at this stage of her career, but we do not look at Loma Lookboonmee and think, wow, that is a top tier MMA grappler by any means.
You start training at Bang Tao with the Hickman brothers, their new gym, JHK, doing a feature from there. I'm excited to see his work there. But when it comes down to this fight, you look at the odds. Hughes plus 180 at open, plus 170 right now. For Istela Nunes, open minus 210. She's minus 205. We have a look at the votes over on Tapology. I assume they'll be heavily skewed towards Nunes because the odds somewhat are, again, there's some real head scratchers here, and Sam Hughes on a 3-fight losing streak. I'll say over under 75% Nunes.
I'll say under.
I'm going to say under. It is over 504 total votes, 86% Nunes, 85% by decision for the 14% that have Hughes, 78% by decision. So Matt, I have Istela Nunes in this fight. I don't think it's any big secret. I think her striking and her output on the feet is good enough, especially in a matchup like this. I like the head movement. Again, we talked about the movement on the feet. I do expect Sam Hughes to push a pace. I like Nunes going side to side though, and I really do like her counters on Sam Hughes' entries. So for me, I'm going with Istela Nunes. I sounded a little bit like a wizard right there. I hate to talk in those future tenses because, listen, you can't call yourself an oracle or a guru in this game, but I do have Nunes in this pick.
I agree with everything you said, but I'm only going to offer up this one red flag. If it does go bad for Nunes, she's losing a 30-25 decision. It's going to be getting taken down, dragged to the ground, rinse and repeat round after round, and it's going to be hard to watch. But I do agree with you. I do think her side-to-side movement is going to give Sam Hughes troubles, especially with her takedown entries, and I do think with that, Nunes will be able to accumulate some damage on the feet and win this fight.
Big time fight. Both of us going with Brazil's Istela Nunes to get the win. You let us know down below in the comments section who you have in this fight. We got some big ones coming up. Caio Borralho in the co-main event taking on Gaji Omar Gadzhiev, and in the main event, Vicente Luque taking on Belal Muhammad for the second time. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. This is the quintessential Don King MMA fight.
You like watching people get for free?
We have Trey Ogden making his UFC debut. He's taking on the Monkey King, Jordan Leavitt. And why do I say that, Matt? It's because these two guys go hard when it comes to the grappling. And this is one of those ones where, for Jordan Leavitt, just look at his fights so far in the UFC. Claudio Puelles notwithstanding, that fight, though, did involve a heavy amount of grappling. And for both of those guys, setting that fight up, what are they both good at? High crotch single legs. And what do they both do? That exact thing. And Claudio Puelles was able to get the win. We call him the knee bar king in these points. Look at what he did to Chris Grutzmacher. But for Jordan Leavitt, you consider it on Dana White's Contender Series, gets a win over Luke Flores by submission, comes into the UFC, picks up Matt Wyman, everybody's smiling until they're not, when Jordan Leavitt slams him, and it was one of the most disgusting slam knockouts. Most of them are all disgusting, but that one was pretty darn bad. And then if you look at it, the last time out for Jordan Leavitt, he's taking on Matt Sales. Matt Sales talked about it before the fight with Leavitt. He got up around the 200-pound mark, and he was cutting down. He wasn't going to fight at featherweight. He's going to take it at lightweight. And while the fight started, Matt Sales poking, prodding. I'm a striker. I come out of Alliance. And then Jordan Leavitt, gets taken down, and Jordan Leavitt powers his way through it, and then he ends up in an inverted triangle, and he gets it. You don't see that at lightweight very often. I mean, I did just talk about it with Vanessa Demopoulos, but that's women's strawweight. You never see that at men's lightweight. Jordan Leavitt is a great grappler. But when it comes down to this fight, Matt, I talk about it in terms of these guys are great grapplers. Here's a stat on the page that you can tell your friends when you're watching this fight at Buffalo Wild Wings. 17 of the 24 wins between these guys are by submission. And for Trey Ogden, While he is a better striker than Jordan Leavitt, I will say that, he is also a very, very tricky grappler. I think this is going to be one of the more fun fights on the card.
This should be a scramble fest if it lives up to its hopes, because Jordan Leavitt, like you had said, he is a very good wrestler, and he's an odd kind of wrestler. He will get into the clinch, go for sort of high body trips, then work his way down to the legs, and then try to chain wrestle from that point on. But against someone like Trey Ogden, who has absurdly clean finishing technique on his defensive submissions, that's going to be a really tough game plan to go in there with, because Leavitt is someone who will just go for a lot of takedowns. He's a really good athlete for this division, and I do feel like sometimes he almost gets a little bit caught up with his own athleticism. He's like a Precious Achua from the first half of this season, where it's like, okay, I'm really strong, I'm pretty fast, I have some of these tools. He just sort of explodes a little bit too much on some of his takedowns, and I do think that's going to offer at least a window for Trey Ogden to be able to get on with one of those guillotines, or at least promote a scramble once this fight does hit the mat. And if we do start getting a scramble off a Leavitt takedown, that's when this fight should get really fun, because I agree 100%. I do think Ogden is the better striker in this matchup. I don't think I'm ready to say he could go out there and really outstrike guys, let's say the top 25, for instance, for 15 minutes. I think he can use his striking to work it into clinch to then get it down to the mat. But against Leavitt, the worst case scenario of this fight is neither guy can take each other to the mat. I would definitely favor Ogden if that's the type of fight we get, but I'm really curious to see this one situation. Can Ogden get back up to his feet and not just try to work his jiu-jitsu off his back? Because how many times do we see this? A guy threatens with a guillotine, might come close for a second, and that's sort of the only burst they have for the round. That might look really good for those 30 seconds, but if the other 2 minutes, 3 minutes of the round are just spent with Jordan Leavitt in that top position on top of Trey Ogden, it could start to lead towards Leavitt winning rounds that way.
And Trey Ogden, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in his own right. He's one of the coaches at Glory MMA and Fitness Overland Park as well. And when you look at it, the way that Trey Ogden does strike, I said it's better than Jordan Leavitt, but there's a caveat there. It's not like championship level striking. It's not like Charles Oliveira. I'm a good grappler. I'm a good striker. For Trey Ogden, it is a lot of throws a jab, reset, throws a right hand, reset, throw a kick, reset. It's a lot of single shots, and when he's trying to close distance, he kind of comes right in, leaves his head there, and you could hit him. But for Jordan Leavitt, I've talked about it, when it comes to his striking technique, he usually fight with an arm up, and then he just kind of clubs his hands around. Kind of almost strikes like Alexei Oleinik a little bit, like he's going to come in here a little wonky.
That's not a great thing to say about a 26-year-old.
Hey, I will say, Khamzat Chimaev threw some of those clubs, and they worked against
They look like they hurt, though.
Exactly. You never know what kind of club's coming at you. But when it comes to this matchup, I do favor Ogden in the striking a bit. With Jordan Leavitt, though, that athleticism with his takedown attempts, you love to see it. He's coming out of Syndicate. He has a Syndicate teammate on this card as well that we'll talk about a little bit later on, and Brandon Jenkins. But, Matt, when we do look at this one, I mean, for Trey Ogden, he gets the win on Dana White's Looking for a Fight. It's for UFC 53 main event for their lightweight strap. He's taking on JJ Okanovich. And in that fight, I mean, listen, Trey Ogden, rest in peace Nipsey Hussle. He walks out to a classic and Grinding All My Life. I don't like that song. That's going to lose everybody out there right now. But I just personally don't like that song. It's overplayed. But as I had in my notes, a lot of single shots, good double leg. And once it got down to the mat, like, they sold you, if you just watch the fight and then you watch what happens on Looking for a Fight, they sell you wolf tickets on that fight. It's like JJ Okanovich, giant prospect. He was in that fight. That armbar was deep. It was deep for all of 2 or 3 seconds. And the rest of the first round was controlled by Ogden. And then the second round, he had him broken and he took right over. So a big win for Trey Ogden. He had about a year and a few months off between his second to last fight and that fight against Okanovich. But that's it. A lot of layoffs throughout the career of Trey Ogden. You look at the level of competition that he's faced in the past. Some of those losses. 2 first-round guillotine losses to Thomas Gifford. Didn't have a good run in the UFC. Friend of the show. But Matt, when we do look at this fight, again, you talk about a clash of styles. Leavitt, he comes in off Season 4 Dana White's Contender Series. He's had a pretty interesting run so far. And he also has a YouTube channel like us, but his is for book recommendations. So if you want to learn about good books, Jordan Leavitt actually has a really good YouTube channel. I'm pushing you that direction. When it comes down to this fight, Trey Ogden opened a plus 135 underdog. He is a minus 135 favorite right now. Jordan Leavitt opened minus 155. He's around a plus 110. If we have a look at the Tapology votes, surprised us they are to you. I'm going to say the more known commodity is probably favored by the fans. I'm going to say 65% Jordan Leavitt over under.
I'll say over.
I'm going to say over. It's way over. 439 total votes, 82% Leavitt, 22% by decision, 72% by submission, 18% with Ogden, 67% by decision. So Matt, the odds have changed. Trey Ogden's the favorite. The fans have Jordan Leavitt, overwhelming majority. What say you?
So there's two different questions I'm going to answer right now. I'm going to answer who I think is going to win this fight. I think Jordan Leavitt is going to win this fight. I think him getting on top is really going to be the key. If he doesn't fall into a submission, I do think he's the more reliant guy who can go out there and win rounds. This is what I will say, though. I think he is a one-trick pony. And not even just a one-trick pony. He's a one-trick pony in a one-horse town. Shout out Blackberry Smoke of all bands. I really do think that Leavitt is going to find a lot of trouble once he starts fighting other guys who are well-rounded near that top 15. Because this way you have to remember, at 155 pounds, if you want to even think about being ranked, like, Mark Madsen's on a pretty good win streak right now. Most people think he doesn't even deserve to fight a top 15 guy, even if they think he's going to be a plus 500 underdog. You need to be so exceptionally good at this weight class to really break through and prove that, okay, I'm one of these prospects who deserves to be here. Like, Grant Dawson's at this weight class, and he is very far outside the top 15, but a very promising young talent. I would favor Grant Dawson quite heavily if he ever did fight Jordan Leavitt, so it would be nice to see Leavitt add a new wrinkle to his game. If he comes out here this weekend and starts really using the jab a lot better, maybe showing some improvements in his striking, maybe I will reevaluate him in the future, but for now I think he'll be able to get it done against Trey Ogden.
Originally supposed to be Jordan Leavitt versus former catcher and DH Victor Martinez. Not that Victor Martinez, but MMA's version. Trey Ogden stepping in on somewhat a short notice to take that fight. The Ogden fight that I went back and watched and I did not necessarily love, even though he gets a finish, is over 15-18 Cody Carrillo. And in that fight, Trey Ogden's striking defense wasn't very good. Carrillo closed the distance. He smashed away. He was really offensive with it. And really, you look at it, I mean, he gets a double leg. He ends up in his position. He ends up getting the submission. But for me, I'm going to go with youth on our side here in Jordan Leavitt. But this is one where I think either guy is live, and I think if you like Trey Ogden by submission, pretty good opportunity there, as he is now the favorite in this fight. So both of us now going with the underdog, Jordan Leavitt. I can't wait for fight week on this one. Can't wait to see these guys square off. Obviously, you have the height and slight reach advantage for Trey Ogden, so we'll see how that one plays out on Friday. Question mark kicks on Saturday, and a big time card coming up that you're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. From a performance of the night spinning wheel kick knockout against an 18-fight UFC veteran on a pay-per-view card, performance of the night, you heard me say that right. Chris Barnett Beast Boy is now drawing a Dana White's Contender Series debutante on the undercard of a Fight Night card that's relatively weak. And it is kind of crazy to see that for Chris Barnett, because UFC matchmakers are probably sitting there going, geez, I don't know what this guy's ceiling is at this point. I mean, Bleacher Report in 2014 said this was the heavyweight prospect to watch to break through. But that was 2014. Now we're 2022. And for Barnett, he takes a short notice UFC debut. He was already getting ready for a fight against Brett Martin. And he ends up with Ben Rothwell, who had a fight book, but now he's not in the UFC anymore. And in that fight, Chris Barnett gets taken down, but he pops right back up at the end of the first round. So you're feeling good. You're excited about Chris Barnett. Now we're going to get to see that exciting beast boy that we knew and loved from all of the different organizations he had competed with in the past. But the second round starts, and he's got less bounce in his step, and he really slows down. And Ben Rothwell gets his signature go-go choke. So for Chris Barnett, he shares something in common with what? Josh Barnett? Like, is that kind of it? Go-go choke? But if you look at it for Barnett, comes out against Jean Vellante, and, well, Jean's run at heavyweight just wasn't all that great. So a big win for Chris Barnett, nonetheless. He's 4-1 in his last 5 fights. He's taken on Slovakia's second UFC fighter. The first one was, of course, Martin Buday's teammate in Leavitt Klein. And for Buday, that's how you go with it on the last name. It's like Peter Buday that used to play for Colorado or for the Montreal Canadiens. And for Buday, if you just go back and you look at some of these fights that he's had in the past, he's taken on Lorenzo Hood over on Dana White's Contender Series. He's a minus 400 favorite, and he does what a minus 400 favorite should do. Now, I will say, Lorenzo Hood offered him a little bit of resistance up against that cage at one point. Buday, a little bit of blood on the face, but overall, Buday pulls off a big-time impressive win. But Matt, I watched a lot of Martin Buday, and there was one performance that I found to be a little bit of an outlier. It was the fight for the Octagon title before he went on Dana White's Contender Series, and it was uncharacteristically Buday. So I don't know if you saw the same thing when you were doing your tape study, but for me, this guy is a very, very technical heavyweight, and sometimes it's heavy to beat technique when it comes to this level in this division.
It really is. How many times do we sit here and say, this heavyweight fighter is going to win because they have a lot of power? All the time, because that's what the majority of fighters at this weight class have to rely on. And I'll just get my piece on Chris Barnett really quick. we can be very honest about what his skill set is because we kind of know all about it. There's not a lot of secrets when you're fighting someone like Chris Barnett. And I know that's a weird thing to say because he is so explosive and he does a lot of unknown things. But I'm just throwing all the unknowns into one category. If you just watch out for the kind of wildness of him in the first 3 minutes of a fight, it makes the other 12 minutes so much easier, it's not even funny. Like, for Chris Barnett, someone like Stipe Miocic would be the hardest matchup in the world for him. Just anybody with any level of steadiness to their game, because that's exactly what Ben Rothwell offered him, and he did struggle with that. And when you look at Martin Buday, it's not difficult to see a younger, maybe even a more aggressive, maybe even a Ben Rothwell with a little bit more punching power. Now, he doesn't have the unique chokes of Rothwell. No one really does. Physically, Ben Rothwell's built like Tyson Fury. He even sometimes has the personality of it. But Ben Rothwell, people forget just how good he was back in his prime. And I do think it's really interesting that they're giving Buday Barnett when Rothwell was Barnett's introduction to the UFC, because I really do think Buday and Rothwell do have some similarities between their games. They are both huge for this weight class. I know heavyweight, everybody's pretty big, but physically, Buday really is going to stand out as being one of the better athletes in this weight class. And against someone like Barnett, who honestly sizes up against a lot of middleweights. I know he's a thicker guy and he moves around
Used to be a super heavyweight. It's crazy.
But you look at him and you look at someone like Paulo Costa. If they stood next to each other, Paulo might even look a little bit bigger than him, and I really do think that the size and the steadiness of Buday is going to give Barnett a lot of troubles. Buday is someone who can stick behind the jab. He will stand very upright, and this is the thing I don't necessarily like about him. He does eat quite a few leg kicks, and I do think that's something that is going to be a really big problem for him in the future, because we both know what's coming up if he beats Chris Barnett.
No, it's...
The Andre Arlovsky skill check will eventually be on its way one day or another.
This is going to be the fight where it actually pays out. Chris Barnett is a huge leg kicker. They're thunderous, they're powerful, and Martin Buday doesn't check them at all. And that's a huge red flag. Like a giant red flag.
He does have huge legs, though. I'll give him that. He can definitely eat more than I can, but it's not a good sign.
Early storm for Chris Barnett, kind of. But I mean, again, go back and watch this fight against Jean Vellante. He was able to go through the first round, and in the second round, it's where he's really finding his groove, starting to hit his mark, and he's able to get the finish. So, again, I'm not totally sold on that. But what I will say about Buday, and this is the performance that I went back to, because you can go back, you can watch all the Octagon performances. They're all out there. You can find a lot of tape on Martin Buday. Level of competition, not that great. I mean, from the debut, takes on Ono, that's fine. Takes on my guy Juan Espino in the Spanish regional scene in 2017. My guy, Juan, where are you at? Fight every weekend. I love Juan Espino. Then he takes on 1-2, 2-5, 1-4, 21-17. Those are sketchy records once you get there. 1-0, 5-3. And then he takes on 7-1 Camille Minda over in Octagon 25. And I wrote copious notes for that fight, but I will spare you the boring details. First round, Buday loses it. Camille Minda pushing a pace, working behind a jab, throwing his leg kick, working his overhand right. And it kind of, not busted up Buday, but he was able to do great work. But then, oh, by the way, Camille Minda was a couple weeks away from his 36th birthday. And in the second round, his cardio kind of waned a little bit. And that was when you were able to see Buday take over. And he's able to go out there. He's able to get the finish. But what I will say, it kind of reminded me of when Alexander Emelianenko took on Eddie Bankson. Where it was like, what even finished that fight? I don't understand. Because you watch it, Martin Buday, no word of a lie, hits him with a jab.
You gotta stop doing that.
And then all of a sudden, Camille Minda, closes this eye, so you can't, and I thought it was an eye poke, to be completely honest with everybody. He kind of starts to blink, and then there's another jab, and he just kind of falls backwards, and that's the end of the fight. So it was a really, really weird end to a fight that Buday was losing until he won it. So I just wanted to throw that one out there, because other than that, it's been a lot of clinch up, it's been a lot of takedowns, and the thing that I love out of Buday is he'll work that upper body, and then he drops levels and gets that double leg really, really well. So it's one of those things that I like to see out of him. He's a very, very technical heavyweight, and when he fights in his own pace, he does great, great work. So if we have a look at the odds for this one, Barnett opened a plus 120s, plus 170 at this point. Martin Buday opened a minus 140s, minus 210. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprised to us, they are to you. I'm going to say 55% Beast Boy, over and under.
I think Buday by 70%.
Ooh, look at that. 571 total votes, 63% Buday, 74% by knockout. For the 37% that have Barnett, it is 81% by knockout. So a lot of people seeing the knockout here, Matt. We've laid out a plan for one guy, maybe not as much for the other. We haven't been so down the middle this week, but this is one of those matchups where Chris Barnett can get one of those wild knockouts. I'm eager to see the Teddy Atlas water in the basement with the leg kicks early from Barnett if we do see that, but this should be an interesting fight for unranked heavyweights here.
I do believe, though, stylistically, it's a bad one for Barnett. Yes, he does have leg kicks, but if he starts throwing a lot of leg kicks, those are going to sap his own energy a lot faster, and that's going to hurt him get one of those highlight reel KOs later on. That's the thing, too. I'm pretty excited about the Jean Vellante knockout. He knocked out Jean Vellante at heavyweight, though.
The retirement fight.
Exactly. That doesn't mean all that much. Jean Vellante barely made the heavyweight limit in that fight, and this is a guy who used to weigh in at 205, so I don't put all that much stock into that performance. It just sort of reinforced what we already knew about Barnett, and that is he can throw these crazy strikes. If they do land, they have great effect. I just don't think he's going to have that chance against someone like Buday, who does have the wrestling advantage, and I do think he will have the cardio advantage, especially if he can keep at a maintained pace. Avoid that brawl, especially early on when Barnett's got all of his power, but I do think as this fight progresses, the steadiness of Buday will take over.
And I've seen it out of Rothwell against Barnett. I've seen it for Buday against Dietrich over with Octagon 14. Similar game plan. Into the clinch, wears on him for a couple minutes, drops levels, gets a takedown, and he's able to get the finish win. So both of us in this fight going to Slovakia's Martin Buday. It's Badius is the nickname. You let us know who you have in this fight. Do you have Beast Boy? Do you have Buday? And a big time card coming up. We've got Mounir Lazzez taking on Elizeu, Zaleski to Santos. That's an amazing one. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend at lightweight, will the Uptown funk you up? It's a different Ronson. It's Canada's version. And for a Canadian version, I thought I'd go with my best Mauro Ranallo there. But we have Jesse Ronson making his 5th start with the UFC, which might sound crazy to some people, but he originally did have a string of fights back in around 2014. He lost 3 split decisions in a row, and they said, see you later. Those names, Matt. I just want to get those out of the way. Michel Prazeres, Tractor, Francisco Trinaldo, and Kevin Lee. So they didn't give him any favors in those 3 fights. He spends some time away, wins 2 in a row, loses 3 in a row, and then he's more so on the winning end. But a real head-scratcher of a signing to make a short-notice UFC debut at 170 pounds against Nicholas Dalby. Everybody assumed that Jesse Ronson was going to lose that fight. I think it was 95% of the fans had Dalby to win that one. And Jesse Ronson, what does he do? He comes out striking. He ends up getting the finish. He ends up looking amazing in that fight. But the craziest part about it is it's overturned to a no contest after the fact. I mean, he even had a performance bonus. He has a lengthy layoff due to USADA suspension. And listen, he's come out and said it was more than likely a tainted supplement, but he used up all the supplements, so they weren't able to test it. But he accepted the punishment. He had an interview. I got to make sure that I give credit where it's due. MMA Sucka with James Lynch, where he kind of clears his name a little bit and clears the air. But really excited about this fight. I'm excited about the progression in his game. Realizes that we're kind of close to the end of the line here at 36, but a good opportunity for him. And I want to throw this out there because there's probably some fans that are tuning in. They're doing their own tape study. They're hanging out here, talking and watching fights with us. On Tapology, it says this one is at welterweight, where Jesse Ronson competed his last time out. He cleared the air on Twitter, said no, this is in fact at lightweight. Rafa Garcia is of course a lightweight, and for Rafa Garcia, some weighing concerns sometimes, but if you look at it, short notice debut against Nasrat Hakparast. He's unable to get the win there. Takes on Chris Grutzmacher. Has a great first round, possible 10-8, but the judge didn't see it that way. Round 2, round 3 go the way of Grutzmacher. And his last time out against Natan Levy, able to get the win there. But for Garcia, he's really one of those guys that's a wrestle boxer. And he really tosses that right hand out there, going to try and get some of those takedowns. So we get a wrestle boxer in Garcia. We get a pretty polished striker out of Jesse Ronson. And again, a head scratcher that they brought him into the UFC because he went over with the PFL, took on Natan Schultz, and there is some, a story there. He was supposed to take on Silva, and Silva missed weight. Natan Schultz was supposed to take on another guy, and he missed weight. So on a day's notice on weigh-in day, they went, well, Jesse Ronson, you want to fight the guy that won the season the year before? And he went, yeah, I guess. So he loses the decision there, and he takes on Alexei Akin, and he loses by finish. Beats Troy Lampson.
That was a tough matchup for him.
It really was. Beats Troy Lampson over with BTC in a main event. Submits him. That's a quality win. And then he gets that short notice call-up. But really, I don't know if I'd say it's a clash of styles, but these guys definitely do it in different ways. I'll say that.
100%. I do agree with everything you said about Ronson, but I do feel like we need to give him his flowers for that Dalby performance because I was truly impressed about how good he looked. And I was really upset's a bit of a stretch. You get the idea. Like, it's been unfortunate we couldn't see that same fighter compete a little bit more actively afterwards because Dalby, maybe a little bit past it, but you get the idea. He was still a well-rounded guy, a big name, and for Ronson to look as good as he did, I was really impressed by him. This fight against Rafa Garcia is going to be very interesting, though, because, like you would say for Garcia, he's someone who will wing that overhand right, kind of crash himself into distance to have some of his success. But I thought he was going to have a lot of success with his stand-up at the UFC level, and that hasn't really been the case up until this point. And maybe a lot of success, again, is a bit of hyperbole on my part, but I thought he would be able to at least implore his boxing a little bit more to close the distance. But with Garcia, up until this point, it really has been more pressure-oriented just with his physicality than I'm trying to set things up with my strikes on the inside. Now, if he lands, it's going to land with big power, because he does put everything behind all of his shots, but it's not one of those styles that really lends itself to longevity in a tough fight against a bigger guy too, and I do think that the size of Ronson's going to play a big part in this fight because let's say Garcia is going for a lot of wrestling. Let's say he's trying to get this fight to the mat, which you'd imagine he would try to, being the smaller guy who is the better grappler. I do think the strength of Ronson is really going to help him defend a lot of those early takedown attempts from Garcia, and if Garcia doesn't start investing, at least in the leg kicks, in the body attacks, just some of those attacks that are going to equal them out a little bit as the fight goes on, I do think Garcia is going to have trouble at distance in this matchup.
So the crazy part is Jesse Ronson replaces Danny Roberts on very, very short notice to take on Nicholas Dalby, and he ends up getting that win as a pretty big underdog. Rafa Garcia replaces Don Madge on really short notice to take on Nasrat Hakparas. Don Madge, almost like a face of the franchise with the PFL now, but you look at it, he's not able to get that win. He's a minus 330 favorite over Chris Grutzmacher, doesn't get that one done, and then again, he's about a minus 115 against Natan Levy. Decision win, 7-12 on his takedown attempts in that one against the karate guy in Levy. I had it rounds 1 and round 3 for Garcia. Maybe you could make an argument the other way, but realistically, you look at this one, he's gone back to Denver once more. Onyx Sports, pound for pound fitness, Justin Houghton, who you saw in the corner last weekend, Tisha Torres, Raquel Pennington, but Rafa Garcia is one of those guys, even before he was in the UFC, when he was with Combate, when he was winning the title, getting the win over Umberto Bandanai, he was brought in to California for Justin Gaethje to train with, and so far, it hasn't really worked out. It's like Chris Tuchscherer with Brock Lesnar. Chris Tuchscherer, he's not Brock Lesnar.
It's not really something I've ever really even thought about until right now, but you do know that some of those relationships are a lot more one-sided than the other way, and like, for Justin Gaethje, I'm sure it's helped him quite a bit, but you're right, we haven't necessarily seen those improvements from Garcia since he has helped Gaethje.
So pressure forward, again, overhand right, that's pretty much what you will see, and a lot of really crazy early career submission wins, some arm bars, knee bar out there as well, heel hook I should say, but you look at the odds for this one, Rafa Garcia open to minus 160, minus 125 right now. Jesse Ronson's gain from a plus 140, roughly a plus 110. And listen, Matt, we'll hazard a guess as to what the Tapology votes are. Surprise to us there. To you, I'm going to say over under 60% Garcia.
I think Ronson will be the favorite.
Garcia, 541 total votes, 79% Garcia, 85% by decision for the 21% that have Ronson off the 20-month USADA suspension he had, 67% by decision, 17% by submission. So the fans are going with Garcia. The odds have Garcia, but they're shifting towards Ronson. You talked about Ronson's takedown defense. It's something that has kind of cost him in the past against some really good guys. I mean, Michel Prazeres years ago was a beast in that division. Trinaldo, still somewhat of a beast at 170. And Kevin Lee, future champ. But Jesse Ronson didn't have an easy go that way. Again, takedown defense, not his forte, but his striking certainly is. So who do you have here?
If Ronson didn't have a 2-year layoff, I think there's a great chance he would win this fight. I do think it's going to take him a little bit of time to get his timing back, though, and that's a tough ask to do when you're fighting someone who is so pressure-oriented like Rafa Garcia is, and I do think that if Garcia can get on the inside, he will have a lot of success. But this is the only thing about Garcia I don't really love. His variety of shots on the feet is not good whatsoever. It's like Tyre Gilbert Burns in the last 30 seconds of last night's fight, where it's just spam overhand right, spam overhand right. He'll throw an overhand left too, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, it's just overhands one way or the other. If there was more variety to his strikes, I'd have more confidence in my pick with Garcia, but I am going to pick Rafa Garcia for this one.
I've got Garcia as well. The layoff of Ronson, again, he just turned 36 3 months ago, so he's fresh. He's had a lot of time off. He's improved his game, I'm sure. But I do like Garcia, especially with the takedowns, and he will go to that well over and over and over again until he's belly breathing and makes you nervous. So I do have Rafa Garcia in this fight. Maybe not one of the more confident picks on this one, but both of us going with Mexico's own Garcia to get the win over our fellow Canadian. It hurts. It does. We have another Canadian on this card, TJ Laramie, taking on Pat Sabatini, and in the main event, Vicente Luque, Belal Muhammad. It's the rematch. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. The comeback fight for Drakkar Klose, looking to rebound off his loss to Beneil Dariush, and he's taking on the human highlight reel, Brandon Jenkins. Matt, this is a head scratcher of a fight because before the long layoff, before the loss to Beneil Dariush, Drakkar Klose thought of as one of the better lightweights that was out there. I mean, even if you scratch that out, 11-1 with a draw, and in the UFC his only loss was to a Tamor brother. It was David. It was the better Tamor. So if you do look at it, Drakkar Klose was able to rack off 3 big wins after that Tamor loss over Lando Venata, over Bobby Green, very controversially. Very, very controversially. And then he beats Christos Giagos, a well-rounded guy, especially with his grappling and his submission abilities, before losing to Beneil Dariush. Now, that Dariush fight was wild. Go back and watch that. It's absolutely insane. Both guys rocked. Beneil.
That's where this meme comes from. The Joe Rogan, Daniel Cormier, John Anik.
It was insane. So, Klose takes about a year away. And I gotta mention the names that he was booked with. Jai Herbert, the fight fell out. Luis Pena, the fight fell out. Jeremy Stevens, the push, the concussion, the herniated disc, all the questions around Drakkar Klose. He takes some more time off. Now he's about 2 years removed from that fight against Beneil Dariush. He's taking on Brandon Jenkins, who is the biggest head scratcher of a signing in the UFC. I mean, he loses to Mike Breeden 2.5 years ago over with LFA by flying knee. He beats Jordan Hinman in one of the most disgusting spinning back elbow knockouts I've ever seen. Go watch it. It sounds like a guy hitting a golf ball off a tee. It's a ping when his elbow spins around and hits him. You can find that one on YouTube. Jenkins then beats Aaron Mitchell, a guy who came in on really short notice for the fight, was taped up like Judo Dan Kelly, and Jenkins is able to grind out a decision in that one. And then he beats Jacob Kilburn, who's had a bad run in the UFC and also outside of the UFC with the most delayed jumping switch knee I've ever seen in my life.
I'm going to push back a little bit. I don't completely disagree with the UFC signing Brandon Jenkins. Like, he's an exciting fighter who does crazy stuff. Does he always win? No, but no one in the UFC does.
So he came in on short notice, replacing Dakota Bush. He took on Rong Zhu, and he got beat soundly. He got finished in that fight. Continue.
Okay, all those things are very true. Again, when a guy has multiple wins, though, by spinning elbows and flying knees outside the UFC, I don't question the UFC signing him, because that guy is definitely going to bring eyeballs in. And when you're an unranked fighter bringing eyeballs in, we can't often point to people like that. So this is a weird fight, though, and I kind of like it for Drakkar Klose coming back, because I'm a big advocate for kind of, warm-up fights when guys are promising talents who have been away for a long time, who have some question marks around their health coming back. Because I think everybody who can agree, who's ever watched Brandon Jenkins and who's ever watched Drakkar Klose can admit, Drakkar Klose is the much more technical guy. He has the better cardio. He's more defensively sound. And really, he just doesn't leave a lot of massive holes in his game. Really, the only time we've ever seen him get caught and hurt was when he hurt Beneil Dariush. You guys may have heard of him before. Very, very good fighter. And he just got a little overexcited when he was going for his own finish, and Dariush was able to crack him with his own big shot and finish him with one of the craziest combos we've ever seen in MMA. But don't get it twisted. Drakkar Klose defensively with his striking defense is very, very high level. Like, you brought up some of the guys who he's fought. Yes, the Bobby Green fight was close, and the Giagos fight was quite close too, but those are two really good fighters. And even if you're having close fights with those guys, I'd much rather you have a close fight with Bobby Green than you barely beat somebody come off Dana White Tuesday Night Contenders. Like, Drakkar Klose to me Is he a top 15 guy? Maybe on his best day he could be in that 13 to 15 range, but I think he offers anybody a very difficult fight between rank 10 and 25, let's say. And I don't think Brandon Jenkins is necessarily in that category, because in the lightweight division at the UFC, like, we've talked about this every time we talk about this division. Like, you have to be world-class to not even break into the rankings, to be a borderline ranked fighter in this division. Drakkar Klose at least worked his way up to that point, and I do think that just him being so defensively sound isn't going to leave the window open for Brandon Jenkins to land one of those crazy techniques that he normally relies on.
No, I mean, again, Brandon Jenkins came in on a few days' notice to take on Ronson. He gets knocked down in the first round. He gets finished in the third round. It wasn't a very good performance, so we'll see what happens here in this one. Jenkins out of Syndicate. You also have Jordan Leavitt on this card from that gym. Drakkar Klose, he spent time at Fight Ready in the past, as well as the MMA Lab. And for Klose at this point, he's 34. He just turned 34 about a month ago. So it's do or die. It's now or never for him in his career.
And I think that's a great point that you bring up too, because for Klose, this injury couldn't have happened at a worse time of his career. He was almost in the top 15 in his early 30s. So you still have a little bit of time to work. Now you've missed out on that sort of late prime window from like that 31 to 35 category. So I couldn't agree more. For Klose, he really does have to get things moving from this point on. Like, let's say he does look impressive against Jenkins. I hope he has a name in mind that he can go to on the mic afterwards, just so he can set up, okay, what's the next fight for Klose to hopefully get him back to where he was pre-injury.
And for Drakkar Klose, again, I said about that Bobby Green fight, unanimous decision win. All three judges gave the first round and the third round, the first and the second to Drakkar Klose. MMA decisions, there were 3 people that had it 30-29 for Klose. There were 11 that had it 30-29 for Bobby Green. I went back and watched it. Bobby Green's volume was definitely there. And Drakkar Klose is one of those guys, if he can't figure out the distance, it's not good for Drakkar Klose. I mean, you talked about it before we even started to film. Like, that fight against David Tamor, it really didn't go his way. I mean, his UFC debut was against Devin Powell. He looked like a world beater, beat main zone. So we'll see how that plays out in this fight against Brandon Jenkins, a guy who's not really dependent on his volume, more dependent on some of those flashy strikes. When you look at the odds for this one, close opener minus 260 is a minus 415. Brandon Jenkins open to plus 220 is plus 310. If we have a look over on Tapology, I do not anticipate that it's overly close. I'm going to say over. Oh, see what I did right there? I'm going to say over under 90% close. What would you say?
I'll say under, but it'll be high.
It's much higher. 571 total votes, 97% close, 70% by decision, 23% by knockout for the 3% that have Jenkins, 50% by knockout. I've got Drakkar Klose. Again, I wouldn't anchor a parlay to it based on the inactivity, the 2 years away. But the best Drakkar Klose beats the best Brandon Jenkins 9.9 times out of 10.
And I think that's the best way of breaking it down. But I will say this. I don't think we're going to get prime Drakkar Klose. Whatever version you think of Drakkar Klose, take like 15% off of it, at least for this first fight. Maybe he'll show up, look kind of rusty early on, and kind of settle himself into the fight late. But don't forget how good of a fighter he was before that Dariush fighter, even during the Dariush fight. Like, Drakkar Klose is maybe not a top-ranked lightweight, but he really is a talented one. I think he'll be able to get it done against Jenkins.
And for me, I wouldn't be surprised if he also mixes in a little bit of the wrestling against Brandon Jenkins, because we've seen takedown defense be an issue for Jenkins on the regional scene. So both of us in this fight going with the guy representing Phoenix. It's Drakkar Klose out of Michigan. So let us know who you have down below in the comment section. Big fights on this card, including a big time debut for Caio Borralho, and he's taking on Haji, the man himself, Omar Gadzhiev, in that co-main event. You have Luque taking on a tricky out in Belal Muhammad in a rematch in that main. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, let's get into it. Sweden, let's get into it. We got a big time fight in the rematch between Lina Lansberg, the elbow queen. She's taking on Bonsai, Pannie Kianzad. This is a fight that took place many moons ago, back in the far away past. That was 2012, with Pannie Kianzad getting the third round TKO victory. And I'm going to talk about that first fight quite a bit. But these two have a lot of history together. In 2010, at the National Sweden Featherweight Shoot Fighting Championship, Lina Lansberg won gold, Pannie Kianzad won silver. So a few years later, 2012, they take on each other. It was Lansberg's pro debut in MMA. Kianzad, 22 years old, already 2-0. And in the first round, Pannie Kianzad beats her down pretty bad. She's able to get the takedown, she's able to get into mount, and then somehow Kianzad lands a little high in the mount after she hammers away. Lansberg reverses position. Lansberg rallies in the second round. able to come back, elbows in the clinch, knees quite a bit. Her striking looked great. And then in the third round, Kianzad pressures, gets it into a clinch, gets that double leg, takes it down to the mat, gets back and mount once more. And then I think it's 3:44 of that third round. She's able to get that TKO victory. Lansberg still defending a little bit, but she took a lot of unanswered shots. So a big win for Kianzad. MMA Math suggests, Matt, that Lina Lansberg wins this fight because she beat Macy Chasson and Pannie Kianzad lost to her on the Ultimate Fighter.
Well, our job's done here, Craig. We can leave.
Finale, so we're done. However, we all realize that that's not so. And if you do look at it for Pannie Kianzad, no stranger to a rematch in her pro MMA career. -600 favorite against Jessica Rose Clark with Invicta. She gets the win there. About a -115, -125 when they rematched in the UFC. Kianzad gets a win once more. Picked up a few more. Betch Kohea, Sajara Eubanks, and Alexis Davis. That was a close fight, a very close fight. But her last time out, she was not victorious against Raquel Pennington. For Lina Lansberg, looking to throw it back, looking to really do the Sarah McMahon. And I know that was her last fight, and McMahon was able to win by decision 2 years, 2 months ago. Since then, Lina Lansberg, she's had a kid, Akira Corsani adjacent out of that team, Redline TC. But for Lansberg, little bit of a layoff. She's now 40 years old, but as I say, like Sarah McMahon, who really impressed everybody with that win over Carol Hossa, over 40 years old.
That kid's not going to have any bullies when they grow up, judging by who their parents are.
No, that's true. But when you do look at this one, it is a bit of a question mark when you have a layoff at this age, especially in this division, but it can be done.
And it was something we had just talked about with the Drakkar Klose fight. Like, we're worried about him missing out on years 32 to 34 in his career. Lina Lansberg's missed out on 38 to 40. And I will say this, Sarah McMahon was somebody who I thought would not have a lot of success on her comeback from being a mother. She is later in her career. She's had a lot of fights, but she has looked good as of late, especially in her last performance. So there is a world out there where Lina Lansberg does look like the former Lina Lansberg, the true elbow queen that she once was. But when I look at this fight, if in their primes they do match up very closely, I just don't believe Lina Lansberg is currently in her prime. And for Kianzad, I will say this, I was kind of down on her after that Pennington performance, but to be fair, Pennington has looked really, really good as of late, like on one of the better stretches of her career. But I thought Kianzad would really be able to use her volume and her distance striking effectively against Pennington, but Pennington, like a pit bull on a bone, just would not get away from her. Kept on crashing the distance, was just so effective with her own kind of defensive striking and not really letting Kianzad getting the fight to where she wanted it. But in this fight against Lina Lansberg, it's going to be really interesting. Can Lansberg have that success in the clinch at this stage of her career? Because Lansberg's one of these fighters who, when she gets the fight into a position that she finds advantageous, she really goes for it. She throws a very high level of volume. She's very active on the clinch with her elbows. You don't get the nickname Elbow Queen for just, not doing anything and being very inactive. But I do worry about her cardio with that type of a fight against someone like Kianzad at this stage of her career with the long layoff.
If you do look at it for Lansberg, 2008 and 2012 IFMA gold medalist. That's the International Federation of Muay Thai Associations. She also competed against Valentina and Antonina Shevchenko in Muay Thai, and she definitely has that in her back pocket. We see it out there. If you like Joanne Calderwood at 125, you like Lina Lansberg at 135. Similar types of skill sets when it comes to that striking, when it comes to the clinch work, the knees, the elbows, so on and so forth. A little bit more well-rounded is Pannie Kianzad, and she's kind of added a few tools to her game, but it still is the similarity of clinch to, or strike to clinch to get it down, and then really wail away with the ground and pound. 15-6 now the record of Kianzad. Back when they met, it was 2-0, and now for Lina Lansberg, 10-5. And if we do focus on some of those wins, just to give her the credit where it is due, Gina Mazzani, Tanya Evinger, she was able to beat Macy Chasson.
That was a big win.
Losses to Chris Cyborg by finish in the debuts in the UFC. Lost to Yana Kunitskaya and then Sarah McMahon. We have a look at the odds for this one. Kianzad open to -300, -320. Lansberg open to +250, +245. And if we have a look at the votes, Matt, on Topology, I don't anticipate them to be close. I'm going to say over under 85% Kianzad.
I'll say over.
You're going to say over? It's over. 535 total votes, 93% Kianzad. 90% by decision, 7% have Lansberg, 79% by decision. The first of our rematches on this card, Matt, I have Pannie Kianzad. I've seen it time and again, what her skill set and where it can be, and I think it overmatches Lansberg. Now, Lansberg did surprise me with that win just across the way from Malmo over there in Copenhagen, the win over Macy Chasson. But I have to go with Kianzad here.
I do like Kianzad in this matchup. Again, her last fight against Raquel Pennington, she didn't look very good. So this is going to be a really important fight for her to kind of reset and get back to where she was earlier. But Lansberg kind of fights a similar way to Raquel Pennington, a very forward pressure, heavy fighter. They both clinch quite a bit. I do think Kianzad can use some of those lessons that she learned in her last fight to implore into this one. And also, like you had said, she has a lot of experience fighting Lina Lansberg at this point. So hopefully Kianzad can lean upon some of that prior experience to help her out in this matchup.
Both of us going with Sweden's own Pannie Kianzad. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have in this matchup and the many more that are on this card that you're not going to want to miss. Just keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Nightmare, Brown Bear, ranked fighters might care? I don't know, I mean that's my best, but we have a fight coming up this weekend at heavyweight between Brown Bear Devin Clark and Nightmare William Knight. Matt, for William Knight, he weighed in at heavyweight his last time out, but they let him fight at light heavyweight anyways. Took on Maxim Grecian a month and 3 weeks ago, we'll call it. For William Knight, he comes in at 218 pounds. He was taking some of that mass gainer. He was getting yoked. And now Devin Clark's got to pick up some of the secret sauce. And he's got to get ready to move up and make this big jump up to heavyweight. And really, when you do look at this one for William Knight, you look at some of the fights that he's had in the past. I know the fight against Tafon Chukwe, we're above 205. That much is true. You look at some of the other ones, I mean, really early on in his career, light heavyweight, bounced around a little bit. He took on Herdem Alekbek over on Contender Series. That one was at light heavyweight. And then when we're taking on Tafon Chukwe, the old catchweight, the old super, what is it called? Cruiserweight is what it's called, at 225. Since then, he went on a 3-fight win streak, lost to Da Unjung, couple of wins, one over Fabio Charant, one over Alonzo Menafield that was very close. And then he ends up in that spot against Max Grecian. But Matt, the big question for William Knight this weekend would have been, if this was at 205, how's he going to make the weight? But now that it's at 265, where do you expect him to weigh in at?
Also, how is he going to make the weight? It is interesting because for William Knight, we know that, okay, he must walk around at least north of 220. We can all agree on that. So let's assume he at least tried to cut a little bit of weight. At least walked into a sauna and did anything. Like, I don't know if you've ever been in a sauna before, but you sweat a lot really quick, and you can lose a couple of pounds pretty fast. So I'm assuming William Knight weighs, like, well into 230. I really do expect him to weigh, I'm going to say, this will be like a side Fight Night prediction. I'm going to say between 235 and 238. I'll say in that range. I really do think he's going to be one of the heavier guys, because if you look at other fighters like Alir Latifi, Jean Vellante, former light heavyweights, they themselves have weighed in around that range before. And I do think William Knight, although height-wise he is not going to look like a heavyweight whatsoever, I know we bring this up all the time, please go on his Instagram. All he does is strength and conditioning to the nth degree. Like, it's kind of ridiculous the types of gains this guy's getting in the gym. I saw a video go all over Twitter and Instagram of, like, not even MMA content, just being like, unranked MMA fighter can bench press 490 pounds. And I'm like, hey, that's William Knight. I know who that is, not just some unranked guy to me. But that really is... You hate to say, like, oh, strength and conditioning is his style, but when you look at how he fights in MMA, it's a lot of single shots, it's a lot of really hoping and relying on his own knockout power, and it's a fighter who... He is very basic in the way he goes about things, but I'll at least give him a little bit of credit with this. When you have as much power as William Knight does, you don't have to be a fighter like Yair Rodriguez. You don't need to set things up for a 720 head kick. A 1-2 combo can really take you far when you do have the power of someone like Knight, but the question is, can that take you far at the UFC level? And even with Devin Clark, he is not a world beater by any means, but he's been in there with a lot of top level fighters. Whether he's beat them or lost to him, he does at least have the experience edge in this matchup.
The thing is, he hasn't beaten any of those top level
fighters.
fighters.
I do think being in there does help you out to a certain degree. That is always experience that you are going to take going forward.
So if you look at it for Devin Clark, he comes in off of RFA 37. Dana White's looking for a fight season 1 where they still had Nick the Tooth and Matt Serra. Those guys didn't get along from what they say, allegedly. But if you do look at it, he gets knocked out by Alex Nicholson. He beats Josh Stansbury and Jake Collier, loses to Jan Blachowicz, beats Mike Rodriguez by decision, loses to Alexander Rakic,
dropped him though.
Darko Stuzic, loses to Ryan Spann, beats Saquon Townsend, beats Alonzo Menafield, loses to Anthony Smith in a main event, a 3-rounder, and then, it was a 5-rounder, and then he loses to Iwan Kutsalaba his last time out there, a co-main event of a fight night, and he got completely out-wrestled by Iwan Kutsalaba, which was a little bit of a surprise, because if you look at the way that Devin Clark fights, he is a 2-time JUCO All-American at 184 pounds. He was a 2009 national champion, and that's how he fights. I fight national champion wrestling. That should be the slogan for Devin Clark. He should get that tattooed instead of the deer antlers on his chest, because that is his style. And he doesn't necessarily, we haven't seen a giant progression since he's joined the UFC in his striking. He's been a long-time Jackson Wink guy. If you go over on his Instagram, he's been training quite a bit at Elevation Fight Team. You know them for Neil Magny, but Curtis Blades adjacent. You've got Alistair Overeem popping in as well. So maybe you see some gains in Devin Clark's game. But for William Knight, still out of Thornton Martial Arts, I seem to be the one that talks about the strength and conditioning, because there are no videos on his Instagram, or very, very few, of him hitting the pads, of him doing much in terms of his MMA. Now, when it does come to William Knight's MMA game, that's where it's going to be, we're going to be butting heads, because in certain fights, William Knight, very takedown heavy, lots of top pressure. He can work from side control. He can put his body weight on top of you from half guard to where you can't force yourself up, and then he's able to work some of that ground and pound. Or he fights Daun Jung, and Daun Jung completely out-wrestles him. And Daun Jung, if you don't know, is a very, very fun boxer to watch. So that was crazy to see that fight go the way that it went. Since then, he was able to get the wins over Sharon, the win over Alonzo Menefield, which was, again, very, very close. And then the fight against Max Grecian that didn't go his way, but he also missed weight by 12 pounds.
Isn't it interesting, though, how you look at Devin Clark's last loss is Iwan Kutalaba? I would say a much better version of William Knight, but there's some similarities there. William Knight's last loss to Maxim Grecian. Maybe not a carbon copy of Devin Clark, but a guy who will go out there, box his way into range, go for the takedown. I just think it's interesting that both guys' previous opponent, I do think will get them at least a little bit prepared for their next one. But this is what I go back to, and I'm glad you brought up the Daun Jung fight. I really do think Devin Clark watched that fight and thought, great, I can fight exactly like that. Because William Knight, he does have good offensive wrestling, but I do think a lot of that just comes down to how physically strong he is and his level of athleticism. I don't think he can go out there and wrestle for wrestling's sake with someone like Devin Clark, who does tend to tire as his fights go on. He just has a decent work rate, but it will start to tail off. I still think he has the better cardio than William Knight does in this fight, and for Devin Clark, do I worry about him eating a big shot and losing his, top, 4 or 5 teeth? That was gross, that injury. Maybe a little bit, but I do think he is the more well-rounded guy in this fight. And this is the last thing I'll say. Devin Clark has underrated leg kicks. They leave his head very wide open when he throws them because he doesn't leave his hands up. But they are a good offensive tool that he sometimes employs.
William Knight doesn't check him either.
Exactly. So I do think that's something that if Clark has success with early, I would definitely expect momentum to continue to shift his side. And he did hurt Alexander Rakic. I feel like I need to bring this up every single time we talk about Devin Clark. But Rakic has looked maybe not unbeatable, but he's not a guy who gets hit clean very often. He normally gets in and gets out relatively unscathed, and although he was able to knock out Devin Clark, I thought Clark looked pretty good even though he got knocked out in the first round.
So we're Sunday, April 10th as we film this. On March 31st, Nolan Kings with MMA Junkie sent the tweet out to say that this fight was announced, so it is short notice. It is at heavyweight, mass gainer, whatever you can get into you, all those legal supplements. You got to get up there for something. I mean, you can weigh wherever you want, I guess. But when I do look at this one, Matt, it is a tricky one. The odds get Devin Clark open to -150s, -170. William Knight open to +130s, +143. If we have a look at the Topology votes, they will be a surprise to me because honestly, I have no idea even where to set the bar.
Can I set them then?
Go for it.
I'm going to say Devin Clark 60%.
Yeah, I'm going to say over. I was going to say 65, and we'll have a look. Ooh, we're both wrong. 410 total votes, 65% Knight, 74% by knockout. For the 35% that have Clark, 89% by decision. I think if Devin Clark wins, he'll most likely win by decision as well. And for William Knight, definitely has that knockout ability. He has some experience up here in the higher weight class, I guess I would say. So it'll be interesting to see how he makes out. He took that fight on really short notice, though. His last time out against Max Grecian, he replaced Short Fuse, artesian well specialist Ed Herman. So an interesting one there for William Knight. Go read about that one if you want. For me, though, I do have Devin Clark. I think the takedowns are going to be important. William Knight, not big on checking the leg kick. Could he knock out Devin Clark? 110%. These are unranked heavyweights. It's just, if I don't pick Devin Clark, his dad might wake me up in the middle of the night screaming in my face like he screams at Devin Clark when he's in the octagon. That man gets so fired up. Devin Clark's dad.
Wow. Okay, is it on an Eddie Alvarez's wife level, or is it more like Arnold Allen's father, more of a supportive type of a role.
It's the loudest yells you've ever heard.
I agree with your Devin Clark prediction, though. Here's the thing. If William Knight wins, I couldn't agree more. It's going to be one of these hellacious... He doesn't really throw overhands. This is what I will say. He does throw this, like, weird shovel hook for being a shorter guy.
He dips back and throws it.
It does come from a weird angle. Not really a traditional hook, not really an uppercut. It comes from one of those, like, submarine angles, to throw a baseball term. Darren O'Day. Probably my favorite submarine pitcher coming out of the bullpen. Don't know why his name came to mind. But that is the technique that Knight has. And if he is able to back Devin Clark up against the cage, get him to be an upright fighter, that's when one of those big hooks could land. But I do think Clark is the much more skilled fighter in this matchup. And I do think his wrestling will be the X factor.
We could be wrong on this one. We'll find out on Saturday. Both of us going with Devin Clark to get the win. You let us know down below in the comments section who you have. Is it William Knight? Is it the Brown Bear, Devin Clark? And we have some big time fights left on this card that you're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Chug a Mountain Dew and crank the Metallica. We got a wild fight coming up this weekend at welterweight. Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. The nickname is Capoeira. He's a lot of fun to watch. And if you don't believe me, go back and watch his last fight against Benoit Saint-Denis, where the referee couldn't referee any more UFC fights anymore because he put such a beatdown on Francis Saint-Denis. And we look at the fight that he has coming up this weekend against Tunisia's own Mounir Lazzez. The nickname's the Sniper. The end of the camp. Rounding it out at Extreme Couture, and I'll throw the picture up there. You've got the Sean Stricklands of the world, the Chris Curtises, and Sadibou C as well. But he's a Team Nogueira Dubai guy as well. And we've seen it out of Mounir Lazzez. I mean, on the regional scene, really lighting it up, really putting together some great performances. Knockout artist, long-range weapons, good in the clinch. We even saw it in his debut against Abdulrazak Al Hassan. If you can withstand that early storm, you can get through. And he was able to do that. His last time out, he took on a bit of an enigma. He took on the Warlley Alves that we always know and love and want to show up. It's just sometimes that Warlley we don't get. But Warlley decided that in the clinch, when he broke, he was going to go Muay Thai in Thailand against the Banana Trees. And he threw 1, 2, 3, kicks to the body and crumpled Lazzez in a co-main event over on Fight Island on a Wednesday, albeit, but a giant opportunity for Mounir Lazzez. Probably the biggest. I mean, the biggest would have been a main event in a card like that on Fight Island, but in a co-main event slot like that. And now it's been a while since we've seen Lazzez. The last time it was a year and 2 months ago. So a little bit of a head scratcher as to how he's able to pick up the pieces, because the last time he did lose, he picked up 3 big wins and he ended up in the UFC. Really, overall, it's just what version are we going to get of Lazzez this weekend?
Mounir Lazzez has been like the opposite of Paula Abdul. That song, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Lose to Warlley Alves, fight Elizeu Zaleski. That's the way I look at this fight. Because personally, in the unranked rankings, I know Tapology has what they have, sort of the outside the top 15 are. But in my mind's eye, I have Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos much higher up the rankings than I have Warlley Alves. And I know Warlley, you never really know what version you're going to get of him. And that's kind of why I have a hard time sort of ranking him in the overall landscape of 170. But I do think Zaleski is a tough matchup for pretty much anybody in this division. When you go back and watch and look through all of his losses, okay, you lost to Li Jingliang in a fight of the night that was a wild back and forth fight where, let's be honest, Li Jingliang looked incredible in that fight.
Yeah.
And he had a very forgettable fight against Muslim Salikov that could have gone either way. Neither guy threw a lot of volume. There wasn't anything in that fight that really made it stand out for one guy or the other.
Who's going to spin like a top first? Neither.
And then both guys just proceeded to stare at each other for 15 minutes. It was a really disappointing fight. But Zaleski looked phenomenal his last time out against Saint-Denis. And it was a weird fight because you have Saint-Denis, a natural lightweight moving up. It was on short notice. There was a lot against him in that matchup. But Zaleski passed with flying colors. He put so much damage on him in that fight. And the real question mark I had in that fight too was, how is Elizeu going to look as it goes late? Because we all know how explosive he is early into fights. He's getting a little bit older, kind of wondering when Father Time's going to catch up to him. But he was able to show that even in a grueling fight like that, he does still have power late, and he is still defensively sound late in a fight. So you do really like those things, because for Zaleski, every fight to me, it just feels like, okay, when is Father Time going to finally catch up? Because you kind of know where his skill set lies at this point. He's a really good boxer. He has a really nice overhand right, and he does this false step to get it going too. People know that he really likes to shift his hips to throw those spinning back kicks. Go watch the Sean Strickland fight, one of the craziest knockouts ever. But he almost uses that shiftiness to his benefit benefit because he can use the way he sets up his kicks to actually throw his punches. And it's not something we see all that common in the UFC, but it's one of those things that does help him stand out from just your average unranked welterweight. This is the big drawback, though, from Zaleski. Aim big, you miss big every now and then, and that really was the story from his career. When he does fight those upper echelon guys, go back and watch the Li Jingliang fight. I highly implore you to if you haven't recently, because Li Jingliang, high style, I can be very patient, I wait for you to miss with your big hook, and then I can just punish you with my straight down the middle shots. When you look at what Mounir Lazzez can do, he's not the fighter Li Jingliang is. Let's get that out of the way right now. But he can take some of those techniques and some of those strengths that Li Jingliang did, and I think he could have some success with them in this fight.
If we match up skill for skill out of both of these guys, Mounir Lazzez, in terms of his striking, in terms of, okay, A+ is what? Like Conor McGregor against Jose Aldo? Like, what? Pick your poison, but you know what an A+ is in terms of striking. I'd say it's somewhere in the B+ tier. It's his best skill, 100%. It's his best skill. His takedown offense, I'd probably say like a C+, B-, somewhere there. Like, that is something that he can definitely use. His takedown defense, not that great. I know in the UFC it might show you 60% over 2 fights. Mounir Lazzez's takedown defense is his worst attribute, I would say. His striking defense, it's not great, it's not bad. It's somewhere in that B- type of tier, C+. So Mounir Lazzez, we're trying to paint a picture of a ceiling for him. I say fun fighter. I doubt he cracks the rankings. He's a little bit old for this division. He does have a nice size advantage in this fight, and he will have that in a lot of his fights. And for Elizeu, when his striking's on and he's at his prime, it's right up there. It's a B+, it's an A-, it's somewhere right up around there. His takedown defense, I know, again, numbers on a page, 62%. Luigi Vendramini almost submitted him up a weight class on short notice. Who else? Like,
they're flying need him, though.
That much is true, but we have seen fights where Elizeu, Zaleski, Dos Santos, again, Benoit Saint-Denis was able to take him down, win around that way. Although, again, Vyacheslav Kiselev can no longer referee UFC fights.
He took down Lyman Good, though, in their fight.
He did take down Lyman Good. He took down Alexei Kunchenko, a known wrestler. But if I had to say, I mean, Li Jingliang got a couple of the takedowns as well. That's just a hole for Zaleski. His takedown offense, we just don't normally see it.
I'd say we see it more often than you'd probably think, honestly. When Dos Santos does get tired, he does shoot for a lot of double leg takedowns, and it's one of those things he'll shoot for from like middle way through the second round on. You don't really expect it as much as he does do it, but something in his back pocket he can always go back to. When he gets hurt, he'll try to go for it too. Go back to the Max Griffin fight. Griffin was able to hurt him on a few occasions throughout their fight, but the difference is Dos Santos has one of those weird chins. It's not glass, it's not granite. It's kind of like rubber. He has really good recovery, I'd say, but he can get dropped in fights, and he's been hurt in multiple fights. Lyman Good was able to hurt him. Max Griffin was able to hurt him. The difference is, when he gets hurt, he looks like he's completely unconscious for half a second, and then he gets up and he's basically the exact same fighter he was before he got hurt. He does have great recovery, and that's the thing. Unless Lazzez can get enough volume together to where he hurts Santos and then can blitz him right afterwards, I don't think Lazzez has the overall output to really stick with Dos Santos in a grueling fight later on in the second and third round, once Lazzez isn't able to maintain his footwork and still stay on the outside.
So it'll be an interesting one, because when we look at the odds, Zaleski open a -125, he's -195 or thereabouts. For Lazzez, open +105, +160 if we have a look on Tapology. Votes are surprise to us as they are to you. I'm going to say over under 70% for Zaleski Dos Santos here.
I'll say over.
I'm going to say over. It is over 542 total votes, 84% Zaleski, 32% by decision, 59% by knockout. For the 16% that have Lazzez, 39% by decision, 46% thereabouts by knockout. So complete skill set more than likely goes to Zaleski. He definitely has faced a tougher level of competition and much more competition. And he had his Matt Brown run of a 7-fight win streak from 2016 to 2019. Finished off by a big knockout win over Curtis Millender, ex-MMA's own. So Matt, when we look at this one for the final pick, Mounir Lazzez definitely has it in the tank to get a win. He's got the size. We'll see if he plays into some of those takedowns, works off of what he's kind of been working on at Extreme Couture. But what do you see in this fight here?
I think a more traditional striker would actually be a lot easier for Lazzez to judge his distance with, because that's sort of more what he's used to in his own world. I do think the weird hitch of Zaleski is going to give him troubles. He doesn't really set things up with a jab. He's just looks very feint heavy from the outside, and I do think that's going to help him because if he was jab heavy, well, it's going to be hard to get on the inside of the jabbing range of someone like Mounir Lazzez. But since Zaleski is a little bit more based off, I'm going to throw a leg kick, I'll feint the overhand, I'm going to see how you react, then I'll try to land my power shots. I actually think it's going to pay off for him, so I'll pick Elizeu, but I do think Father Time is coming. I don't think that he's going to go on some other run and get back into the top 15. I think he can be a fun fighter against any pure striker in this division because his pure striking really is on that level of, in a pure kickboxing fight, he could beat just about anybody in welterweight, but that's not the sport we're in right now. We're in MMA.
Zaleski is almost, this might sound crazy, almost 4 days away from being a complete year older than Mounir Lazzez, who definitely has, again, less miles on the tank or on the clock, so to speak. So both of us in this fight going with Elizeu, Zaleski, dos Santos to get the win. This should be an absolute barn burner. I can't wait for this fight. We got a couple of big ones up at the top. Debuts at middleweight in the co-main event, and in the main event, it is the rematch at 170 pounds between the man himself, Vicente Luque, taking on Belal Muhammad. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Weird matchmaking coming up this weekend at featherweight. We have The Truth. He was formerly known as that. It's now no nickname for TJ Laramie, coming in here at 24 years old, making a second time out with the UFC. He's taking on Renzo Gracie Philly's own Pat Sabatini, the former CFFC standout. You know Paul Felder's excited for this fight. Sean Brady and the crew over there that represent that gym. But for Sabatini, undefeated in the UFC. Has he withstood adversity? I don't know. Did Jamal Emmers crack him, rock him, pretty well finish him, and then decide, hey, I'm going to go for a finish on the ground? That's Sabatini's world. He went in there and got a wicked submission. Haven't seen Jamal Emmers back in the UFC since then. That was about 6 months ago when he got that heel hook. He also got a big time win over Tucker Lutz's last time out. And before that, a close enough fight, but a good win nonetheless over Tristan Connolly in his UFC debut about 10 months ago. So for Sabatini, not this weekend, but last weekend at UFC 273, he was due to take on Gavin Tucker, Atlanta Canadian. And we don't get that fight. Tucker's out. And for TJ Laramie, he was supposed to take on Melzik Bogdasarian. Bogdasarian out, so they went, you know what, Canadian-American, let's boogie. And they give us TJ Laramie and Pat Sabatini. And the weirdest part about this is, TJ Laramie is one of those guys, bricks in his hands, and he really does throw them out there when he goes to close distance. And that's the best part about his game. If you look at his overall run, over with TKO in 2017, he beat Charles Jourdain. Yes, that's Charles Jourdain. Laramie was 20, Jourdain was 22, and Laramie's able to go out there and capture the featherweight belt. Laramie also the former PFC, not KFC, champ at 145 pounds, beats Daniel Swain on Contender Series, and then he goes out there against Derek Minner, and I know we're going to talk a lot about that Derek Minner fight. Craziest part about TJ Laramie, he fought Charles Jourdain, his brother Tony fought Louis Jourdain, who's the brother of Charles Jourdain. So the pride of Beloit, Quebec, Canada, taking on the pride of Windsor, Ontario. And for Ontario's own Laramie, comes in against Derek Minner. He is a big favorite for that fight. He's a minus 315. And when he went out there, not the most advantageous position for TJ Laramie. He loses that fight in the first minute. Minner gets the win. And then he's booked with Damon Jackson, but he has to back out of that fight. He's supposed to take on Melzik Bogdasarian back in November. He gets a bad case of MRSA, so you hate to see that. It was in the inside of his thigh. I kind of saw that in an interview, and then there were some spots on his face. Gets that cleared up, and then he's rematched with Bogdasarian for this weekend. Melzik out of the fight. In steps Pat Sabatini. But Matt, I set it up this way. You've got a guy who's young at 24, TJ Laramie, minus 3, let's call it 315 against Derek Minner, loses that fight. And now, we don't normally bring the odds up this early, but he's a plus 270 right now as an underdog against Pat Sabatini. It's just crazy to see that big of a sway from one fight to the next.
It definitely is. But I will say this, because you had brought up both guys' original matchups and then them being put together. This is one of those weird situations where Bogdasarian versus TJ Laramie, sign me up. I think that's a great fight. Gavin Tucker versus Pat Sabatini, another great fight. Oh my goodness, some opponents fall out. I still think Laramie Sabatini is going to be a really fun fight because, like, all four of these guys, no matter who you match them up with, I think it would result in fireworks no matter what. You're right, though. For Laramie, was a big favorite coming into the UFC. Didn't look good whatsoever. You know who his debut reminded me of? And I think you'll agree. Hakeem Dawodu. Couldn't have gone any worse.
Danny Henry fight.
like, you come in, there's some hype behind you, and you're a great striker, we're all excited, what happens? You get finished by a guillotine 30 seconds into the fight, and we just never really see you settle into the actual matchup.
And that fight was just over a month removed from his win on Dana White's Contender Series against Daniel Swain. And Swain went for some really good submission attempts early, went for a couple, and then TJ Laramie just kind of sat in guard, and they likened it to Mark Coleman way back in the day. He's just pounding away, and at the end of the round, and listen, Camwella Kirk learned a lot from TJ Laramie in that fight, because at the end of the round, Daniel Swain's standing in his corner. He's like, man, I can't do it. I can't get any power. And his corner's like, well, then we're going to call the fight. No, let's bring in the doctor. And the doctor presses, and he's like, yeah, but my rib's going in. So the doctor's like, no, can't fight anymore. Jason Herzog waves it off. Camwella Kirk going into his fight against Daniel Swain was like, I know he's going to quit. And what happened? He made Daniel Swain quit on the stool.
I don't think you quit if your rib's moving when the doctor's pressing it. That's not you quitting. That's the doctor stopping
it. Quit in the corner. Camwella Kirk took from that to try and make him quit. But for TJ Laramie, it is power shots when he's on the feet to close the distance, to get into the clinch, to work the takedown, to work his ground and pound. And throughout his career, we've seen these big time wins by finish. And you look at it very, very early on. Even his first fight with Pancrase, when he was very young, at 17, he was traveling over to Japan. And it doesn't matter the fact that he was taking on a guy who had a salty record. It was 4-8-4 over with Pancrase, but good experience for him nonetheless to get that in his back pocket. But I just wonder kind of where the development has been over this year and a half that we've seen him away from the octagon, because we know what we're going to get out of Pat Sabatini. Is he striking the best? Not so much, but his grappling is we're turning that power bar all the way up and trying to crank it off. So it's going to be a very, very interesting stylistic matchup here.
We're just trying to figure out at what stage of the Grant Dawson, Gregor Gillespie skill tree is Pat Sabatini right now, because I do feel like all three of those fighters kind of fall under the same overall archetype right now, but Sabatini is the most unproven out of all those three. Now, I think he has a very high ceiling, and I do want to say that. But Sabatini, to me, is just shy of one of those prospects that you're ready to anoint as a future contender already. I really like some of the skills that I've seen in his fights, but he has left some reasons to think, okay, when he does start to fight guys who are a little bit more well-rounded, who have slightly better takedown defense and can expose him as not a poor striker, really just a basic striker at the end of the day, I think Laramie can have a lot of success early on. We know how fast of a striker is. Like, hand speed in this matchup is not even close between Laramie and Sabatini. Laramie's hands are lightning quick, whereas Sabatini, there's a little bit of push and recoil, is a little bit more methodical on the feet, but I do think that if Sabatini gets this to the mat, which I do expect him to, it's going to be one of those cases where he's damaging it with his ground and pound. He's getting past your guard. He's really making you pay for every minute you're spent on the bottom. And I think Laramie, not that he's a poor grappler by any means, but when you've been submitted in the past and now you're going against a guy who I really do believe is of that degree of grappler in Sabatini, I do think you're going to struggle, especially with the defensive wrestling.
It really is a tough one, and I do expect Laramie to actually go out there, go for his own offensive takedowns, because that's what's worked for him in the past, and I just can't see a ton of success. Even Sabatini off his back is one of those tricky fighters, and Daniel Swain even offered up quite a bit when it came to that in that fight that they had on Contender Series. So the odds for this one, Sabatini open to -240, he's -365 favorite right now. Laramie open +205, as I mentioned earlier, plus it's 270 or thereabouts. So have a look at the Tapology votes. To us, they are surprised. To you, they are surprised. I say the over-under, 75% Pat Sabatini.
They should be over, I would think.
They are way over. 500 total votes, 94% Sabatini, 64% by submission for the 6% that have Laramie, 54% by decision, 25% by knockout. I could see a world where TJ Laramie goes out there, throws hammers, knocks Pat Sabatini down to the ground, finishes it up by TKO. I don't think that's a wild assessment. If that fight against Derek Minner didn't happen, because now it clouds my judgment. So recency bias for sure. I do have Pat Sabatini in this fight. But this is an interesting matchup because Laramie is really getting thrown to the wolves in this fight. And this is against an unranked guy in a pretty darn deep division at featherweight. So it should be a good one.
Yeah, and I think Sabatini, maybe not destined for top 15, but I think he offers anybody on the borderline of the rankings at least a tough fight right now, because he does have one of those X factors outside of the rankings. Because how many fighters, they're just kind of well-rounded, and we wait for them to win a few fights in a row, and then they're in the rankings. Pat Sabatini has an extremely dominant top position in his game, which is enough to go out there and really not only win rounds, but get genuine finishes at any point throughout the fight. So that's why I like Sabatini. But I think Laramie, he's going to go in there with the game plan of, hey, I'm probably going to get taken down no matter what, so might as well just go for broke. And that's going to make him pretty dangerous against Sabatini.
Like that takedown offense out of TJ Laramie. We'll see how he makes out in this fight. Winner gets Jonathan Martinez. A big-time fight coming up this weekend. And some more big-time fights on this main card, including a rematch in the main event between Vicente Luque and Belal Muhammad that you're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Per UFC press release email, this fight will take place at bantamweight. We have the flyweight, or so you thought, Maeda Bueno Silva taking on Wu Yanan, who at one point was also a flyweight. Now, Maeda Bueno Silva came into the UFC Dana White's Contender Series 2018 at bantamweight. And in the UFC, it's been an interesting run because if you consider the win that she has over Jillian Robertson by submission, that was about 3.5 years ago when Jillian Robertson submitted everybody.
Thank you. She was hot back. That was a big win at the time that doesn't really look all that good in hindsight. But at the time, people forget just how important that win was, especially in the early days of this division,
Marina Moroz, who we don't see fight often enough. She looked great her last time out. But if you do look at it, Marina Moroz completely outstruck Maeda Bueno Silva. She took her down. She was able to get a convincing win there. You have Bueno Silva getting the win by submission against Mara Romero Barella, who had an interesting time, I guess. Here for it was an oddly long time, and it was kind of a good time. But she was able to get the win there. You have the draw against Montana De La Rosa, and then you have the loss to Manon Fiorot her last time out. But if you go back and you watch that fight for Maeda Bueno Silva, it must have been like, hey, I know I have all these submission wins on my record, but I have a base in Muay Thai, and all she did against Fiorot was walk forward, high tie stance, but she chased Fiorot around the cage. And when normally they say on the broadcast, oh, the fighter that's in retreat, it's so much harder to be in retreat, so on and so forth. Manon Fiorot's style is almost based on that, waiting, baiting you in, throwing those long kicks to the body, pushing you away. And then when Fiorot decides, okay, I'm going to plant and I'm going to throw, then she gets out of dodge. Bueno Silva just wasn't able to figure out the distance and get much going in that fight.
I will say this, though. She looked better against Manon Fiorot than anyone else has up until this point. And I actually thought she looked a lot better in that fight than I thought she was going to. I know she lost, don't get me wrong, but going into that fight, I thought she was going to get absolutely dominated on the feet. So I will say, defensively, she did at least show a couple of things in that matchup that you can take away from and look at as positive.
So stylistically, you go from that and you look at you look at Maeda Bueno Silva, and again, a lot of submission wins on her record, but she doesn't go for a lot of takedowns, and she usually throws her hands, and once somebody takes her down, sometimes she can get into an advantageous position against Marina Moroz, who you would think, smaller fighter, not able to do so, but it's been a weird run for Silva in the UFC. For Wu Yanan, the same can be said, and this is kind of the craziest part about it. I listened to an interview, MMA Mania, friend of the show, Drake Riggs, and he was talking to Wu Yanan about her knee injury, because she is coming off a layoff due to a torn ACL, so it says out there on the internet. But a knee injury nonetheless. Wu Yanan, she's kind of cross-trained at so many different gyms. We've talked about that in the past. She used to be at Team Oyama. She talks about it with Drake, the fact that there was a coach that she used to have in China that went to Jackson Wink. So now she's training at Jackson Wink. She's friends with Meng Bo, former One Championship champion, and a really good relationship there. But she's been spending a lot of time in Vegas, rehabbing that knee, getting ready for this fight. Still a very young fighter. She came into the UFC at 21 years old, wasn't able to get the win early on against Gina Mazzani. Beats Lauren Mueller, who was undefeated at the time, and at that time, Wu Yanan was a plus 305 underdog, but we're again talking...
Mueller was...
3 years and 4 months ago, she loses a split to Mizuki Inoue. Again, Wu Yanan outstruck Mizuki. That was a surprise decision. And then her last time out, up at 135 pounds, she takes on Jocelyn Edwards. Not able to get it done there. Looked a little lost in some of those exchanges. So I'm really interested to see what we get at 135 out of these two, because when I compare their skills, they match up fairly similarly. I mean, for Maeda Bueno Silva, the background of Muay Thai, the striking, the advancing, the pressure. For Wu Yanan, the Sonda background, the kickboxing. You like to see it out of her. And she's a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Got to throw that one out there. But when I do look at this one, skill for skill, one fighter has more skills.
So's Trey Ogden's wife. She also got her blue belt from him a month ago. She's not in the UFC. I'm just saying, blue belt's not at the highest level. This is my problem for Wu Yanan.
I just try to be a nice guy.
No, I'm just saying. I just remembered that when I was going earlier on with Trey Ogden. On his Instagram, he's the coach of the gym, and then he had given her a blue belt, so I just remembered that. The thing for Wu Yanan, she hasn't shown a lot of progression in her MMA career up until this point. You talk about it. She's signed to the UFC at a very young age, only 21 years of age. Very similar to, like, Song Yadog's a fighter who got signed at a very, very young age. But what did we see every single time he went into the cage?
Max Holloway.
A little bit more progression every single time out there. Every single time out there. Might be a win, might be a loss, but I'm going to get a little bit better every single time. For Wu Yanan, I just don't see the progression in her skills. They might be a win, they might be a loss, but you don't look at what she's doing fight to fight and think, wow, she's making wholesale differences. I will say, though, on the other side with Mayra Bueno Silva, I always think back of what Ryan Russillo said about Paul George in the playoffs. If he scores 13 or he scores 30, you can't be surprised. It's going to be one or the other one.
And for Mayra Bueno Silva, that's pretty much it. I mean, it has been, not Randa Marcos-esque, but she did have a couple of draws peppered in there. But in her last performances, you got a close fight against Montana De La Rosa. You got a loss to Manon Fiorot. The scale for Mayra Bueno Silva kind of all over the place. For Wu Yanan, Jocelyn Edwards, not a ranked fighter at bantamweight. Then you have the other losses that are on her record. Again, Gina Mazzani and Mizuki. And we never see Mizuki fight. So it is tough to try and get a good sense of what we're going to get out of Wu Yanan, especially with that knee injury too.
And Lauren Mueller went like 1-5 in the UFC. The win over her does not mean much whatsoever.
So we look at the odds for this one. Bueno Silva opened a -110. She's -387 right now. For Mayra Bueno Silva, she opened a par. She's now -387 favorite. For Wu Yanan, again the same, but she is now a +293. We have a look at the votes over on Tapology. I don't anticipate them to be very close. I'm going to say over under 85% for Shitara.
Over.
Oh, it's over. So 520 total votes, 89% Bueno Silva, 80% by decision. For the 11% that have Wu to get the win, 78% by decision. Shitara switching it up, going from Brazil, training the last leg of her camp with Chris Cyborg. And there's a lot of Chris Cyborg over there on the Instagram. She's got Gloria DePaula there as well. How do you see this one playing out?
I think Mayra Bueno Silva is the much more skilled fighter. She's the much more well-rounded fighter. And do I worry about if she is able to get this fight to the mat? Could she get out volume on the feet? Yes, she could. Because Wu Yanan does have one of those frustrating styles to where she's never really set in a position, but she's always throwing punches. So if you're not able to get in range and really have any big moments in the fight, there's a lot of judges out there who are just going to look at Wu Yanan's overall activity and probably just give her the round based on how much she was doing. I do think though Mayra Bueno Silva, especially if she is able to get it down to the mat, is going to be able to do enough work to really solidify the rounds in the judges' minds. So I do think Bueno Silva should be able to get the win.
You do have Wu Yanan, a little bit of a height advantage in this one. We'll see how it plays out at 135. I also have Bueno Silva. I believe for me, she's a much more skilled fighter in this matchup. So we'll see how it plays out. Let us know down below who you have. Is it Jackson Winks, Wu Yanan? Is it Chris Cyborg, Mayra Bueno Silva out of that gym? You let us know down below who you have. We got some big fights left on this card that you're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Possible fight of the night. Coming up this weekend at welterweight, we have Portugal's own André Fialho. And were you not impressed in his UFC debut on incredibly short notice against Michel Pereira? He comes out here looking pretty darn good. I mean, if you've seen Fialho compete with either the PFL or LFA or Bellator, that this guy was a very hyped up prospect. And he has some quality fights on his resume. Well, he's going to be taking on Caramel Thunder, Miguel Baeza, who's on the first losing streak of his career because he only lost 2 darn fights in his overall career. 10 wins before that. The finish win over Matt Brown, a big time statement where he kind of withstood a little bit of adversity. The win over Takashi Sato, a big time one. Even before that, beating Hector Aldana, which, hey, it's a win and it's a finish. But for Baeza, this is a guy that gets it done standing. For André Fialho, this is a guy that gets it done with his boxing, but also his offensive wrestling. But his defensive wrestling can leave a little bit to be desired. Will Baeza be able to exploit that? I don't know. But South Florida is going to be more excited for this than they are for the aftermath of Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal. You know that because in this fight, we have Sanford MMA taking on MMA Masters. And Matt, if you can't tell, I'm pretty darn excited about this fight.
This should be a phenomenal fight. Forgive me, is it Fight Circus that does the Muay Thai in the phone booths? This could be a fight placed in that setting because these are two guys who do get the majority of their work done, not only on the feet, but in that nice close range where they are susceptible to being hit, where they do have to play sort of that cerebral game on the inside. And that's why I think this fight's going to be so much fun. When you talk about Miguel Baeza and his UFC run, yes, he's 2-2, so it's not all bad.
3-2.
3-2, sorry. But he's had, I don't know, just a very high level of entertainment, I would say, in all of his fights, and that's why we put this as the fight of the night screen. With Baeza, you look at his strengths and they are apparent. He has great punching power. He has really nice combinations too once he settles into the fight, but he's one of these fighters who he lives on the extremes. Offensively, is he very good? Yeah, he is a dynamo offensively. Defensively, does he leave a little bit to be desired? Maybe a lot, because that's the thing about Baeza. Like, in his 5-fight run in the UFC, he has been rocked on multiple occasions in a lot of his fights, be it whether he's won them or lost, and that's something that at the welterweight division, sorry, not the weatherweight division, against someone like Andre Fialho, who we know has incredible power on the inside, not only with his hands, but with elbows too. It's going to be an interesting fight to see. How does Miguel Baeza approach this fight? Do you think we will see a more hesitant version of Baeza? Because he has been cracked a little bit more, especially lately. Do you think it is time to really reevaluate his career and start making some of those wholesale changes?
Well, the tricky thing is, yeah, I mean, he's been finished in his last 2 fights, which is something like durability. You could lean on it before. Again, in the Matt Brown fight, he gets as dropped as a drop without a knockdown gets, and then he comes back, rallies, gets the finish. But if you do look at it for Andre Fialho, and I know we talked about this before his debut against Pereira, and I picked him to beat Pereira, and it was a fun fight, and it was close. I know it's a unanimous decision win for Michel out of Brazil, but if you look at the 4-fight win streak for Andre Fialho, a guy that I've been watching for a very long time, since the Bellator days, the James Vick fight. First round, James Vick. Axe kicks, tossing that kick out there like it's a hand and just tickling him to the ear.
That's awful.
But after Fialho kind of crashes that distance in the second round, he's able to go out there and get the finish. Goes over to UAE Warriors, beats Song Hyun Yu. Then he beats Lincoln Puig over with UAE Warriors. Again, first round finish. Then he takes on Stefan Seklic. A recently cut Stefan Seklic off a controversial loss to Dwight Grant. Seklic goes for the takedown, and Andre Fialho goes, no, get out of there. And Stefan, hey, let go of the takedown, bud, but he didn't. Andrea gets the win there. He loses to Pereira back. That was in January. But again, I referenced it. I mean, this guy has a lot of quality experience to draw from. I mean, a main card fight against Chidi and Njokuani, Bellator, 167 back a few years ago, 2016. A fight against Rick Rager. A fight against AJ Matthews, who seemed to fight every other weekend. A win over Javier Torres. Loses to Chris Curtis in a really competitive fight until near the end. Chris Curtis is finally able to get his own takedown. Fights Glaico França in a 2-round fight. Loses majority decision. Then it's overturned to a no contest because Glaico França gets the win. I thought that Fialho got it, but again, it's 2 rounds. Like, we're really kind of grasping at straws. And then he loses to Antonio dos Santos Jr. over with LFA before the 4-fight run. We talk about Baeza. You talked about it, 3-2 in the UFC. 3 big wins coming in. To answer the question, though, he's supposed to take on Diego Lima, who... It's a long-range striker, but that was going to be Diego's retirement fight, and then he just kind of retired anyway. Now you get Andrea Fialho, a much more game opponent. So it is
So
a
is
tough
that a
one.
yes, you will think Baez is going to look different?
I think Baez is going to be a little more reserved, possibly, but that could be to his detriment.
I couldn't agree more. And it will be interesting to see, because this could be one of those fights where it's like, okay, Miguel, fight like you did against Matt Brown. He's like, what?
Y'all must have forgot.
He's like, wait, you've been telling me for the last 2 months, don't ever fight like I did against Matt Brown. And they're like, no. Be offensive in this matchup, because this is the one thing about Fialho's striking style. He'll fall into a rut every now and then of being a really good combination puncher, and then he'll just become like a single strike guy for minutes sometimes on end, and that's not a great thing to do when you are fighting a guy like Baeza, because if we're just looking at both guys' power, I do think Fialho has more power, and maybe that's just because I do question the durability of Baeza at this stage of his career. Forgive me if I do believe that, just because for Baeza, I don't necessarily think he has a bad chin. Don't get me wrong. If you get dropped by Ponzinibbio, you get hurt by Williams, you get hurt by Brown, like those are all pretty big punchers. We can all agree to that. It's his striking defense that does leave a lot to be desired. When he throws his strikes, he doesn't bring them back to his chin. He brings them back to his chest or his waist, and he can sometimes overthrow his own combinations, and I do worry about if he can't get his own range early, it might look like Ian Gary's fight this past weekend, where his strikes look really good, but you watch how he throws a straight right, and it's like, okay, well, your forearm is at Darian Weeks' head, and your arm just kind of missed him and you overextend it. I think if Baeza starts to find himself overextending, that's when Fialho can get on the inside, land those great hooks to the head.
Left hook.
He's going to land a lot of those really powerful techniques, and I do think that if Fialho is able to land with power, especially early, we've seen Baeza not really be able to eat power shots in this weight class, and I do think Fialho, he's at least as heavy-handed as a 39-year-old Matt Brown in 2020, so I do think if he can land that clean shot early, he'll have an effect on Baeza.
The odds in this one, Baeza open to minus 140. He is a minus 180 favorite. If you look at it for Andrea Fialho, open to plus 120. He is a plus 150. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprised us there to you. I'm going to say over under 70% Baeza.
I'll say Fialho's favorite.
70% Baeza out of 540 total votes. 30% with Fialho. For the Baeza voters, 51% by knockout. For the Fialhos, it is 56% by knockout. So the fans thinking Baeza, the odds thinking Baeza. We set it up a different way. I've got Andrea Fialho in this fight.
I'm going to say this. I think the best version of Baeza beats the best version of Fialho. Yeah. I really do. It's just we haven't seen that version of Baeza in a minute now. And when your striking defense is your Achilles heel at 170 pounds, this isn't a weight class you can screw around and get hit by clean shots at. Like, even lightweight, you don't want to get hit clean by guys that weigh 155 pounds. Normally we think about middleweight, light heavyweight as the big power divisions, but at welterweight, I don't like Baeza's ability to eat shots. I do worry about the activity of Fialho, but I do think he'll be able to land with power early, and I think he'll be able to beat Baeza.
Fialho in the second round against Pereira, he was outstruck quite a bit, and in the third round, but he was able to have a very good first round of his own, so we'll see how this one plays out. Both of us going with Portugal's Andrea Fialho in the underdog role. You let us know who you have, because most likely a lot of people will have Baeza in this one. It should be an amazing fight regardless. We got a couple more big ones at the top of the card that you're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it. Debuting Dana White's Contender Series contract winners meet in a bit of a head scratcher of a co-main event. Coming up this weekend, we have Caillou, Robert Redford baseball movie Bohalio taking on Gaji Omar Gadzhiev. And for the natural, if you didn't get it on the first time, Caio Bohalio is such an interesting prospect coming out of Brazil, because if you took the glasses off, you might go, hey, is that Paulo Costa? Is that guy? At 185. And he has such an interesting style because he can get it done a little bit with his grappling. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but at the same time, he really does have a unique striking style, almost just to him. And I know the broadcast might say, okay, a little bit Machida, a little bit insert karate fighter here. But he is one of those really, really interesting guys to watch, and he has some wrestling defense that we love to see when he took on Aaron Jeffrey, but he also brought in his own wrestling in that one. I think that's a great litmus test coming into the UFC. But really, if you do look at it, he's in around, a plus 135 when he takes on Aaron Jeffrey, or minus 135, I should say. No, it was a plus. Takes on Jesse Murray. Minus 550 favorite to win that fight, and he looked like a minus 550 favorite in that fight.
He looked phenomenal in that matchup, and for Caillou, he does have a very unique style, because he realizes, hey, I have great jiu-jitsu, I'm a pretty big guy, gonna be hard to take me down, why don't I just throw crazy stuff on the feet and force my opponent to grapple me? I will disagree just slightly. I do agree, he has some karate techniques, but it's karate with a lot of fat left on the bone. I wouldn't say it's the clean technique from the outside. He will throw some, I would just say, some overcommitted shots every now and then, and it will be interesting if that's a gauge thing you can sort of calm down on a little bit, because I do really like his striking, and I love that mindset out of a fighter. How many fighters do we see? We talk about how good their jiu-jitsu is, how bad their wrestling is, and how good their striking is, and then we just see them go out there and kind of jab and clinch, and we never really get to see all of their strengths. With Caillou, you know exactly what his strengths are when you watch him fight. He has phenomenal defensive submissions to go along with his takedown defense, which is nice, because he doesn't have to just defend in one traditional way. He can dig underhooks, he can threaten with the guillotine. It's just nice that he does have different things to go to in his back pocket. He doesn't always have to be one of these fighters who just jumps the ghillie a la Dustin Poirier. He will mix it up for his opponent every now and then. But against Gaethje, this is going to be a tough task to ask. And that's why I do think when they start grappling, that's when this fight's really going to get fun. Because on the feet, I can see where both guys do have success. You have the big actions of Caillou on the outside. You have sort of the steadier game of Gaethje, on the inside. When these guys start to wrestle, though, that's when the fight really will tell its story. Because Gaethje on top is the type of guy who will progress a little methodically from one stage to another with his game. But he's putting so much pressure on his opponent. He flattens them out out in a really unique way that you normally only see when someone takes the back of their opponent and they're going for a rear naked choke. You see how they flatten their opponent onto the ground to where they don't really have a leg to stand on or even an arm to push off with. Gaethje kind of does that even from his half guard and his full guard. He's someone who really likes to flatten out his opponent, to not give them any posture, to really try to get some power off. And that's just a nice thing to see from a guy making his UFC debut.
And for both of these guys, for Caio Borralho, you go back, you watch the Future FC fights, really, really easy stuff to find. Former champion over there, had that fight at middleweight against Aaron Jeffrey, 3 weeks notice. He gets that call at light heavyweight, so that's why you see the weigh in there with the asterisks on our graphics. But if you do go through it for Gaethje, I mean, this guy, Combat Sambo world champion, probably comes as no surprise when you watch his fights. For Omar Gaethje, 13-0. The last Combat Sambo guy that I remember coming in at 13-0 happened to be at light heavyweight. Remember Shamil Gamzatov?
I do.
And you know, he kind of looked kind of hot at the start, and then Mikhail Olszewczuk sent him to the Shadow Realm, and we haven't heard of Shamil Gamzatov since. But when you do look at it for Omar Gaethje, I mean, the level of competition not really the greatest, but he is winning the fights in ways that you want to see him win them. And his last time out against Jancy Silva on Contender Series, Silva was a Muay Thai artist. That's it. He was a Muay Thai guy. And once Omar Gaethje decides, okay, I'm done playing the striking game, I'm going to take it down to the mat, he was all over Silva. And when he gets that knee bar, Silva lets out a scream like Piotr Jan on the scales, and it was just, ah! And the fight's over. But it was scary because that knee was crumpled. His opponent didn't get up. Takes on Vladimir Vasiliev over with MMA Series 20. And in that referee was Vyacheslav Kiselyev, who had a mask on, had a GoPro on his head.
There was a lot going on.
He had an earpiece, like a InSync in the year 2000, and a face mask. So a lot to take in for Kiselyev, who loves to do that little pew-pew, shoot 'em up type of thing to the camera. The guy's a turkey. But
Lee does that too.
Yeah, but she's a fighter. You're a referee. Get yourself out of it. But when it comes to that fight against Vasiliev, it really was.
This?
No, I don't know.
Just make up your mind.
That one's cutesy. Don't do the shoot 'em up. But when it comes to Omar Gaethje's performance in that one, first round, it was kind of like me watching Martin Buday in his title fight with Octagon. It's like, okay, why are we striking? Like, what are we doing here? But you have Omar Gaethje going out there, throwing some different looks, closing the distance with some of his strikes. And then as that fight progresses, he just continues to implement that top pressure. And once he gets on top, you rarely say this, like, yeah, people get bucked off, this and that. This is one of the more dominant guys that we see once he gets that top pressure in, like, in terms of overall prospects that I've seen lately, this guy kind of takes the cake for me.
But, and I just got to go back to something you did say earlier. His level of competition hasn't been that good.
Yeah.
So it is easy to look really good against guys you're supposed to beat. And that's why we are going to learn a lot about both these guys in this co-main event. This is not really a hot take, but I actually do believe Gaethje can have more success than you might believe on the feet in this matchup. And this is why. I think if he can make Caio miss with those big actions early, it's just going to help him take over a little bit more later. I don't think he should go in there and try to get into a brawl early. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I do think if he can at least keep this fight in the pocket to where Caio can still throw those big shots but not be close enough to be able to land them with a lot of effect, I do think it's just going to help Gaethje's already superior gas tank in this fight, I do believe.
Caio Borralho is one of those guys, too, that when he starts throwing in combination, like, striking defense goes completely out the window. Even Aaron Jeffrey, even on the regional scene, whatever it might be, like, he leaves himself completely liable with his head completely up on the center line to get hit. So we'll see how that one plays out in this fight. We have a look at the odds. Borralho open to plus 130s, plus 115. Omar Gaethje is now at a minus 140, open at a minus 150. We have a look at the topology votes. Surprised us there to you. I'm going to say over under 65% for Omar Gaethje.
I'll say over.
And it is over 552 total votes, 73% Omar Gaethje, 73% by decision for the 27% that have Borralho, 66% by decision. And for Omar Gaethje, the interesting thing that I kind of went back and saw, he said, I represent Universal Fighters Club and MMA Factory in Paris. And for Caio Borralho, he represents Combat Club and the Fighting Nerds, but also he trains Jiu-Jitsu with Damian Maia, and he's a Judo brown belt. So, Combat Sambo World Champ, Judo brown belt, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in Borralho. Great stylistic matchup, weird co-main event.
I'm still really excited for it, though, because this is the thing. I love fights where we know we're going to learn a lot about both guys, and that's exactly what we're going to get this weekend. You have two exciting prospects who have very good foundations of their skills, who are just going to get better from this point on, and I really do think it might not be fight of the night because Vicente Luque's on this card, and 9 times out of 10, he is in a fight of the night, but I truly do think this is going to be a really fun fight, because again, you have two guys who do... Maybe hype isn't the right word, but they have very promising futures ahead of them, and it's only going to get better from this point on. But I do think Gadzhiev is going to be able to win. I do think his top pressure and his cardio is going to be able to just wear on Caio as this fight progresses.
Yeah, I like Omar Gadzhiev as well in this fight. Again, I'm really eager to see how the jiu-jitsu plays out for Caio Borralho. We get to see him tested, especially against a guy like Omar Gadzhiev, because for Aaron Jeffrey, a lot more traditional with some of his takedown attempts. For Omar Gadzhiev, this guy just goes and goes and goes and goes. So really excited to see this fight. Both of us going with the man himself, Omar Gadzhiev, in this co-main event slot. Let us know down below, because listen, I think these guys are going to have really interesting UFC careers, and I can't wait for this fight. As you said, the rematch in that main event, Vicente Luque taking on Belal Muhammad for all the marbles, going back to UFC 205, that time that Conor McGregor beat Eddie Alvarez. Can't wait for it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Big time fight coming up in our main event this weekend at welterweight for all of the marbles. Gilbert Burns took on Khamzat Chimaev, and they both got win and show bonuses, and it was an amazing fight. So hopefully we can see this one deliver in a rematch of their fight on the prelims at UFC 205, sandwiched between a Jim Miller win and then Tim Boach. But yeah, that really did happen. We have Vicente Luque taking on Belal Muhammad. And when we go back and we watch that fight that they did have the first time, I mean, a powerful left hand that sends Belal Muhammad to the canvas. And he looked like he was out at that point. And then Vicente Luque goes in for the kill. And Big John McCarthy finally eventually decides, okay, he's had enough. Now, since then, the career arc for both these guys has been kind of strange, because for Luque, kind of like one of those uncrowned champs, he was really getting some big quality wins over some guys that were on the periphery of the rankings. But really, if you do look at it, in the last 4 fights for Vicente Luque, Nico Price, he had to put a hurt on him again. Randy Brown, he really had to put a hurt on him.
And they seem to be friends too, which is awful that they had to fight each other twice.
The Tyron Woodley fight where it's knock him out, drag him out, and then Luque submits him, and that was a year ago. And then he goes out there against Michael Chiesa in a fight where most people thought, well, Chiesa's a good grappler, and Chiesa's a good wrestler to get into his grappling. And Vicente Luque goes to Kembe Mutombo, no. So that didn't happen in that one, and Luque gets a big submission win. But for Belal Muhammad, I know the outlier is the fight against Leon Edwards. He was getting torched, but when you rake with the eyes, I mean, sometimes fights end. But some of the wins, Lyman Good, he looked really good in that fight. I know Lyman Good had some extenuating circumstance in that one, but regardless, he beats Diego Lima, where we go, Belal Muhammad, he's a striker? What? Huh? Then he goes out there and he beats Damian Maia, and he looks great in that fight, and he looked really, really good against Wonderboy Thompson. His last time out, that was a fight 3 months and a week ago. Belal Muhammad peaking at 33, and I love to see it.
Belal Muhammad's in a really interesting part in his career, because I can be completely honest, I'd kind of written him off until his last fight. To me, he was like Marcus Smart going into this season for the Celtics. I thought I knew everything about him. I didn't think he could show me anything I hadn't already seen. You're good at defense, you can play make, you also take a lot of bad threes.
You brick threes.
But for Belal Muhammad, he looked like an absolute world beater his last time out against Wonderboy Thompson. And I'm about to say something that might give me a little bit of hate, but I don't think this is something a lot of people can argue with if they're being honest with themselves. The Belal Muhammad that beat Wonderboy Thompson can beat any version of Vicente Luque we've seen up until this point. That's how good Belal Muhammad was on that given night. That's one of those fights that I really do think we're going to look back at the end of Belal Muhammad's career, and whether he ever fights for a title or whether he'll just kind of remain one of these guys, just a good fighter in the top 10, we're going to look back at that and be like, wow, for that one night, Belal Muhammad genuinely could have beat anybody, because Wonderboy, he beat the brakes off of Vicente Luque, let's all be very honest. That was a fun fight, competitive fight, especially early, but once Wonderboy was starting to get rolling, he was able to really tee off on Luque. The difference against Muhammad was he didn't have any success in that fight. Not even a minute of that 25-minute fight could really be scored for Wonderboy Thompson. 15, thank you. For that fight could be scored for Wonderboy, and that's why I've just really been impressed with Belal Muhammad, especially after that fight. But here's the weird thing, and I guess this is where I'll hand it off to you. He looks great against the pure striker Wonderboy. But if we go back not that far, or not that long ago, Leon Edwards, another pure striker, he didn't look good against him whatsoever. So am I looking too much into the Wonderboy fight? Do you think we are going to see sort of like a market adjustment now, and we'll kind of see a Belal Muhammad in between those two fights?
And I mean, it's even an adjustment with Wonderboy too, because you got to focus in on the fact that against Gilbert Burns, somebody finally cracked the code. Somebody was able to get some of those takedowns. Then Belal Muhammad took that, turned it up, cranked the dial up, and threw it out. Because he was able to do the same thing in that fight. So for Belal Muhammad, I'm in 100% agreement. I absolutely love that performance. Going back, watching it, he looked amazing against Wonderboy. Has he slowed down a step? We don't really know. But against two guys that want to wrestle and wrestle hard, Wonderboy wasn't able to get it done. So for Belal Muhammad against Vicente Luque, could he out-wrestle him? Sure. Vicente Luque, probably a little bit better with the jiu-jitsu than we do have at a Belal Muhammad. Belal Muhammad, a guy... Rufus Sport adjacent. I'm making up words in the basement. But when it comes to Belal Muhammad, Valley Flow striking system is really where we see him out of. We know he's out of that Chicago area by way of Wisconsin and back and forth out of those gyms. But for Muhammad, we have seen some improvements in his striking. I bring up that Diego Lima fight. You might laugh me off the face of the earth for that. But we did see Belal Muhammad looking pretty good with his striking. I don't expect that against Vicente Luque. Let's not get that twisted, though, because Vicente Luque, it's a Joe Rogan talking point. He's so good at both stances. But it really is true. With Luque, odd angles, too, at some of those strikes, and that's what makes him so darn special.
And I'm glad you bring up the odd angles. It's not just the odd angles, though, because he is a traditional fighter. It's just, he's almost traditional in an odd way. He throws overhands from both sides, but he can throw an overhand left from an orthodox position. That's not something we often see. Normally that fighter would switch into their southpaw and then use the back arm as the power shot. Luque's really good at making either hand, even the lead hand, the power shot. If you go back to the second fight with Nico Price, and that was a back and forth fight, the left hook that he dropped Nico Price with at the end of that, where he loops in and goes over the top, is a picture perfect technique. Like, unless you do have the distance management of a fighter like Wonderboy Thompson, that technique's gonna land, and when it does land, it lands pretty hard. And the thing I will say about Luque that I really like, he struggled against Wonderboy, who is in range and out of range a lot. If you stand in the pocket with Vicente Luque, I'm here to tell you right now, you're leaving and you're getting finished in the fight. Like, that's where he does thrive. If you stand in the pocket with Luque, he can make really smart, small decisions in the pocket to where he might only move his head a couple centimeters one way or the other, but they're just enough to avoid the brunt of your strike, and then it allows him to be in a very set position for him to land with his own power. And then, of course, we gotta bring up, if this fight does go to the mat, this is the weird thing. I'm old enough to remember Vicente Luque getting out-wrestled by Leon Edwards. That's the thing that happened. Leon Edwards is a very, very good fighter, but it did happen. That's how he was able to beat Luque.
Did the same thing to Gunnar Nelson. It was like, what? Huh?
Exactly. And I do think that there is a world out there where Belal Muhammad's wrestling is dominant enough to where he can take down Luque, make him work a lot, especially early on in those rounds, to where, let's say Muhammad wins the first 3 rounds, and then Luque has to sort of come from behind in those last 2. And this is the last thing I'll say. I don't think Muhammad can finish Vicente Luque. I know the other is true, though. Belal Muhammad's not really a big finisher. I know he has a couple finish wins here and there. The Takashi Sato performance is a very, very nice one that he wins by rear naked choke. But Luque is one of the most durable fighters in UFC history, to where, like, I've seen him eat, like, fight-ending shots in a lot of his fights, and he just kind of reacts to it, brushes it off, and keeps on walking forward, whereas Belal Muhammad has been hurt and rocked multiple times throughout his UFC career.
Leon Edwards out-wrestles Vicente Luque. Mike Graves out-wrestles Vicente Luque on the Ultimate Fighter season finale, and then Wonderboy goes out there and outstrikes and drops Vicente Luque, which isn't something that we see every single day. But if you look at it, like, let's just throw performances out of the window, because you know these guys have incredibly winning records in the UFC. A fight of the night for Belal Muhammad in his UFC debut in 2016 against Alan Jouban. A performance bonus when he gets that win over Takashi Sato by rear naked. This is the line for Vicente Luque. Performance bonus over Haider Hassan.
Anaconda choke, so not something we see a lot.
Performance bonus when he knocks out Hector Urbina. I get it. This is Haider Hassan and Hector Urbina, but still. A fight of the night knockout over Brian Barberena. Finished him by a knee. A split decision win fight of the night over Mike Perry.
Mike Perry looked unrecognizable at the end of that fight after a flying knee that Luque landed.
Yeah, that was like Puggle, Mike Perry at the end of that one. Fight of the night against Wonderboy that he loses. Performance bonus over Randy Brown. Tyron Woodley, fight of the night, even though it's a first round finish win. And then you obviously had, as I sound like a British guy, a performance bonus win over Michael Chiesa in a fight that Again, I reference this all the time, but Kenny the Jet Smith, like, it's over. And it was so darn quick, too, the way that he was able to get that one done. It was crazy, that Darce.
But again, I keep on, like, how did that get set up? Chiesa secured the takedown. That's the one thing in the back of my mind I keep on worrying about, and why I'm not all that confident with Vicente Luque. I think he's the much better striker on the feet, to the point where I genuinely don't believe Belal Muhammad's going to have a lot of success on the feet until Luque loses a little bit of pop on his shots later on in this fight. Because we haven't seen Luque later on in a 5-round atmosphere. But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, kind of like I gave Paulo Costa until we saw him against Marvin Vettori. I think Vicente Luque has pretty good cardio. You know why? I've seen him throw hundreds of strikes in a 15-minute fight, and he doesn't look any less of himself in the last couple minutes to where he does in the first. Like, I do think Luque, he hasn't proven it to me yet, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt right now. I do think he has pretty good cardio, but I do think that early on in this fight, Muhammad's going to have a lot of trouble on the feet with someone like Vicente Luque, who can play the power game, can play the volume game, and is just so darn technical.
Rematches usually favoring the person that won the first iteration for Vicente Luque. Comes in, opens a -210. He's a -170 right now. Belal Muhammad open a +180. He's a +140. We have a look at the votes on Tapology. Surprised us there. To you, let's see where they're at. I'm going to say over under 67.5% in the rematch for the guy who won the first iteration.
I was going to say 80% Luque, so.
Yeah, it's 655 total votes, 83% Luque, 12% by decision, 16%, and then a 67% by knockout. For the 17% that have Muhammad, 80% by decision. I think Vicente goes out there, and I think he gets another finish win against Belal Muhammad. I don't normally put myself out there like that. I do think Vicente Luque is going to keep it rolling, and he's going to set himself up for a fight against Khamzat Chimaev, because I assume Leon Edwards gets that fight against Usman, though nothing's out there, no press releases out there.
Luque versus Chimaev, after what we just saw over the weekend, might turn into the greatest fight of all time.
Gilbert Burns goes, hey buddy, I'll help you out for that one, for sure.
Super boys. I think Luque is going to win this. I agree. I really do think he is that top 5 kind of talent. He even had a decent performance against Wonderboy. I know I brought that up a lot, but I don't think he looked terrible, especially early on in that fight. It's just Wonderboy looked phenomenal on that night and was able to get to him later on, but Wonderboy ate some shots, especially early on in that fight, that you don't really expect him to eat at this stage of his career. So I think it's one of those cases where, hey, it's a 2-man sport, and Wonderboy Thompson looked really good that night. I do think Luque will be able to win this one, probably by finish, because with Vicente Luque, it's sort of like Bradley Beal scored a lot of points on a team no one cares about. Like, all these finishes will eventually get you some respect in the UFC. So let's say he is able to go out there and get another finish win over Belal Muhammad in a main event slot. You would assume, and I think the Chimaev name is a good one to bring up, that his next opponent has got to be a big name.
You got to do it. The timelines match up. We'll see what happens. Maybe it's like Beal against the Orlando Magic. I can't wait for it. Big time fights coming up this weekend. We have question mark kicks 2 hours before the prelims, the final picks, the final predictions. Maybe somebody goes, hey, I don't want Kay Hansen on my line anymore. Let's go with Piero Rodriguez. And the switch actually works out. We'll see what happens there. But a big time card nonetheless. A lot of prospects to get excited about. The 4 debuts. Caio Borralho taking on Gaji Omargadzhiev. You also have Martin Buday making that walk. And Trey Ogden in a clash of the similar style. He's taking on Jordan, the man, the myth, the Leavitt. It should be a big time fight that I know people are excited about. Comment down below with who you like on this card. Toss a like and a subscription. It certainly is appreciated. I see that sub counter going up every single week. And it's been a lot of fun.
Let us know too, because we started the conversation. Who do you guys think the winner will be matched up with?
Yeah.
We were talking earlier. Remember when the heavyweight division had like 5 main events in a 2-month stretch? Welterweight right now is heating up quite a bit. There's a lot of people in the top 10 being matched up or have just fought. So let us know who you guys want to see the winner and the loser get matched up with next.
Should be a big time card. UFC Vegas 51. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.